Hello and welcome to I think the 16th episode of If Supr Says It. Today, I'm trying something new. This is the first four-man If Supr Says It. I'm joined by Lynnx, CDaps, and Fresh to make some Copenhagen major predictions. First time Yardy is not involved in a prediction podcast. How are you
This is a
guys
big
doing?
moment. This is a
Yep.
big moment. I'm doing good. I've got a busy schedule before I fly out for the major tomorrow, so I'm just happy to kind of take some time to relax from schoolwork and just talk about the major.
I
How
just
you
get to
doing?
vibe. I'd literally just
Yep.
get to vibe because there's no analyst desk for stage one. It's just you, Lynnx. Just you on your own. Just shouting at
Woo!
everything, mate.
I'm I've got map band data, which I haven't really taken that seriously in a long time because I haven't really needed to because I haven't been on the desk. So that's definitely been interesting to kind of get back in the rhythm of collecting. So yeah, I'm actually kind of excited for that in a weird sadistic sort of way.
Yeah, and then I just sit here. I just chill because I'm not going to be with you guys in Copenhagen, but whatever.
I won't be either. I'm co-streaming with drops, by the way.
You're not going at all, no.
No, I don't fly across the ocean unless I'm playing.
Okay.
Besides, the HelloFresh sponsorship is too lucrative to take even a day off to
Well,
experience Copenhagen.
I did do a game yesterday, like an anime game, for an hour, and I got like $2,000 from that. So, you know,
You do the gotcha games, throw mad cash at people.
spend $2,000 to fly across the ocean, or stay here and make $2,000 to play an anime game.
It wouldn't be $2,000, and I'm sure they have anime games in Denmark. I'm sure that export
That's
has made
true.
it to Europe.
Where are you flying out of, Lynx? Because I think everybody flies tomorrow. You might be on a plane with some big time gamers.
Well, I'm flying out of Indiana, so I'm gonna say. Well,
Never
actually,
mind.
I'm flying out of Indiana, and I have a connection in New York, so maybe I'll see some big time gamers.
You
there.
might see. I think a couple of our players are flying, like connecting in New York. So maybe you'll be on a plane with some Sonics. If you're lucky enough, you'll get to meet Gunner.
I'll cry. I'll actually cry.
Yeah, so obviously this is a little bit of a, in the past I basically had Yardy on here, and we both pretty much only know NA, and pretty much only I know NA because Yardy doesn't know much, as seen by his newest team's performance. But yeah, I thought because each of you, obviously, you either casted or you're an analyst for different regions. And then I kind of like co-stream all the regions, but obviously I wouldn't say I'm necessarily an expert on any region besides NA. So I think it'll just give actual, maybe more informed opinions or predictions than Yardy predicting Mirage to get top 4 like he did at the last major. They ended up getting group. So I think the first thing to talk about really is, well, there's a couple of things. One is kind of like a hot topic, I guess, is how there are more APAC teams at this event than NA and EU combined. Which I know what they've said is like, it's kind of a work in progress. They're going to like measure results as it goes and then maybe adjust it depending on that. Which is, I mean, I feel like that's kind of fair. The problem, we kind of talked like a little bit briefly about this before we even began. The problem is like the inclination that has going forward for SI. Because for those of you who don't know, maybe you're not as up to date with the updated Blast format. There are only 2 majors this year. And as far as we know, now maybe something minor comes out of nowhere and there's SI points you can get the minor or something. But as far as we know, you can only get SI points basically from these 2 majors and your own region. And obviously, if you make the major, you get more SI points. So like right now, if I was to look at SI, and obviously this doesn't necessarily, it's not going to stay like this. But right now, of the top teams that would qualify for SI, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 of the 20 teams would either be from APAC or MXPL, or which is like LATAM. And that's not even counting Veryl, who are actually tied with M&M for one of the spots. So that to me is like the bigger issue with the format, is that if we are adjusting it as we go, we've already got half the year basically over, and over half the teams that would make SI right now are from APAC, which is like, on one hand, like I see like, yeah, they made the major, so maybe you could say they're more deserving, but on the other hand, it's like, are they better than OXG? And I guess we're going to see, right? But like OXG, BDS, Wild, Los One, Beast Coast, MIBR, these teams are just not going to make SI right now if it were to continue this way. And in theory, that also puts a lot of pressure on them in stage 2 to not only make SI, but have like a pretty good run at SI. Because the other thing that I've always thought about APAC is like, if you're one of the better APAC teams or whatever you want to say, you kind of just stay like that. Like, I feel like it's super top heavy in those regions where like those teams, you know, some of them are come out of nowhere, which we'll talk about some of those teams, but like, it's not that unfathomable for me for like, if there's 11 APAC teams right now that make SI, if 8 of them make the next major, like that would not be unreal to me. And then that means there's, and we'll see how they do, but that means there's potentially like 8 of the 20 teams are from APAC, with 12 teams coming from the three major regions, and not even counting like the LATAM region, really, which is like now MXPL essentially.
Mm-hmm.
What are your guys like thoughts on this? Do you think this is going to be a problem, or do you think it like works itself out?
I think there's a potential that there's a problem. So, like if you say, if the teams that are from Asia Pacific that have come to this major, if they then get, and we'll go into it in the groups and the teams, if they then get wiped through stage 1, and let's say most of them exit the groups in stage 1, right? And then they also do the same in stage 2, they qualify and get wiped again. You've got a situation where by SI points, they will be higher than a lot of teams that are more proven at an international level, in Europe, North America, and in Brazil. But they will, go to 6 Invitational ahead of them. But obviously we don't know that until they go and play. So I would say there is potential that there's a kind of a systematic issue that might need work and addressing.
And an issue for me that doesn't necessarily go with the points, but is just a overall grand scheme of Rainbow Six is, like, for those that don't know, to be in Europe and to be in North America, to like have a team in those 2 regions is far more expensive than the other regions. Outside of like, I would say like Liquid Phase, I think they're paid pretty much on course maybe with like the big regions, but we pay our team a lot of money. Like I would say that what like Grixer probably makes more than an entire APAC team, like by a month.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And at some point you have to move past like, oh, we want parity for everyone, and you have to say, well, NA and EU are very important leagues to have teams in, to have like sustainability. And if it does go that way, where it's like, let's say OXG or Beast Coast gets screwed out of SI or something because of this, that, or like BDS and EU, like that has major implications down the road to me. Because I will tell you, like, as general manager of the Sonics, if we somehow didn't make SI because an APAC team, and again, this is like all hypothetical because we don't know how they're going to perform, but like, if you were to tell me down the road that Sonics missed SI because a team that got like grouped both times at a major is making SI just because they're from APAC, that's like a big problem for me, because it's not I understand you're trying to have parity within the leagues, but you like depending on the performance, you also have to realize like that's not fair to the major regions that are more successful internationally usually, and that just frankly spend a lot more money. Like you're making it hard to justify being in in those leagues. Like why? Like I'll use Revan as an example. They brought a group of CL players from EU, I believe, to LATAM, and they qualified for the major. And I know people like everybody has their own opinion on that, like that they shouldn't have done that, but whatever. Like either way, that worked. And like, what's stopping? Like, let's you like they won't do this obviously, but let's just say Beast Coast. What stops Beast Coast from just going to Mexico and just having like a free major spot every stage? And then your leagues are falling apart because people are doing this everywhere, right? Like it that's the most concerning thing, I think, to me over the points is like you could end up really screwing over teams that you need for the like the esports scene in this game to be successful.
And I think that's what makes the off season and stage 2 such a critical time for decision making, because now that we do have an extended off season during the summer where there might be some events like, for example, Gamers 8 or Gamers Without Borders that qualifies to Gamers 8, but there aren't any events right now, as you said earlier, that do have SI points attached to them. So that actually might give, I mean, I don't know anything about the back end at Blast, but it might actually give some time to deliberate about these things, whereas opposed to like the year before, we finished the Charlotte Major, and just a few weeks later, we're already underway with Stage 2. So there wasn't a lot of time to make, kind of big, wide sweeping format changes. Whereas now we have 3-4 months to actually deliberate over these things and come to informed decisions, and then maybe even make not necessarily some major changes, but tweak some of the points, for example, or tweak some of the points as allocated to regional leagues for Stage 2. At least just with how it looks for the time we have, seems like that might be a possibility to, let's say, we have the Copenhagen Major and most of the APAC or most of the LATAM teams get completely smoked and knocked out. Then we actually have a fair bit of time to make some of these changes. And that's what I'm interested to see, is if that reality does happen, will we actually see maybe some bigger conversations involving Blast and involving the people who actually manage kind of the esports format side of things? If we actually see some of those conversations happening in real time and see some attempts at least to make adjustments for Stage 2, if that happens at Copenhagen.
Yeah, I actually have been told behind the scenes that outside of Gamers 8, like Ubisoft is actively in talks with like organizers to try to set up another minor. Obviously, I have no idea if that's going anywhere or if that'll happen, but I know I've seen like certain people on social media, like, I mean, to be honest, like, why weren't you critiquing this like when it was announced 3 months ago or 4 months ago? But like certain people on social media whose teams did not do well, and now they're realizing, oh wait, now something has to change because I'm not playing for 4 months. They're like throwing a fit. Ubisoft is like, I will say 100%, Ubisoft is not like unaware of this gap in time. And as they announced, like originally, they plan to have like minors during this period. I can't, obviously I don't know the behind the scenes aspect of it, but it is still something that's like actively trying to be worked out to where there is like at least another event besides Gamers 8 between this. Like, no idea if that'll happen, of course, but I know it's just like Ubisoft's just not sitting there like, okay, have fun, like start practicing for 4 months.
And I think I think a really good point to make here as well. I think it was Diamondback on Twitter who tweeted this. Is that like kind of this change in the system? While it is good to have time dedicated for minors, it just like by no fault of Ubisoft or Blast came at a time of very large consolidation of tournament organizers within the esports landscape. Like I think EFG acquiring Esports Engine, Beyond the Summit shutting down. There aren't just as many tournament organizers, period, as there were even a few months ago, let alone last year. So this is just a time right now where there are less options of people, period, to put on minor tournaments and things like that. So like I'm sure Ubisoft are working on the back end, like you said, and according to what you said, they are. And I don't envy their position entirely because you've got Gamers 8, you've got EFG, and maybe Nerd Street, but the options for even tournament organizers to run minors is not nearly as it's not as large of a market as it was a short time ago.
Well,
So I don't
it's
envy their
also
position.
like at the same like going along with that too is like obviously I understand why some teams might be upset, especially if you're on a team where like if you don't make the major, they just don't pay you for the months you're not
Yeah.
working, which in my opinion is wrong. I feel like a percentage of your salary being paid is fine, right? Like let's say you make $3,000 a month, you don't make the tournament, in the off season between you get $2,000. I feel like that's reasonable, and I feel like as a player, you'd be like, okay, well, we didn't perform as well as we could have. I feel like, at least I'm not getting nothing. But just going from like, because from what I understand, there's some teams where it's literally like you're getting $3,000, you miss it, you get nothing. And you got to remember, the whole stage is like a month. So you're getting paid for a month or two, and then just nothing for like 3, like, that to me is more an org issue, whereas if I was a player, I would have first of all never signed a contract like that. Like if it's a contract where you're like getting a percentage if you miss it, I think that's completely reasonable. Everyone is held up to performance standards. Everyone is aware of like what esports are right now, how difficult it is to maintain teams. If you don't perform, to me, the option is take less money or you just get dropped and you get nothing. Like that's kind of what it is. That's just esports in general. But the idea that like you sign a contract where it's just like, yeah, okay, well, thank you for your 1 month. Now for the next 3 months, you're under contract and we're not going to pay you.
I mean, it's also just very transparent, I think, for the orgs that like, drafted contracts and had players sign those contracts. Obviously there is some, agency at the fault of the player, of course, for signing that contract. But also like, if you're a player who hasn't played in Pro League before, I understand like especially for young people, like just the worry that this might be your opportunity, you might be missing it. So it's almost a bit of a predatory situation in that context. But what was I saying? Oh yeah, but it also I think is just more demonstrative of like completely faulty thinking on the org's part. Because what do you expect your players to do during the off season if they're not making any money? Especially if they're like, let's say adults. Let's say they're not 19. Let's say they're like 23, 24. Maybe.
And then like and how does your team improve if like they have to go get a job now?
Exactly.
Or they have to go to school or something. Like
yeah, they've got to put 40 hours at Kroger.
That's like the problem, I think, in some of these leagues. I think it's more so in NA. I don't know about EU if it's necessarily the same, but or like LATAM. But like I would say the top 5 teams in NA can play this game year round, full time, practice every day in the off season, and there's no worry. Like the players are not going to be starving, right? But if you're one of the other 3 teams or whatever that aren't making majors, and again in the other regions, I'm not sure if it's the same, where you're not consistently making majors, you have to like get a job, you have to go to school, you have to do whatever, and then like how are you ever going to catch the other teams if they are already performing better than you and then they can practice way more than you? It's just like that's a very harsh reality for those teams. And then it goes back to the orgs. It's like, well, what why are you even like, are you in the game because you can pay these guys for 3 months out of a year? And you just accept like, yeah, our team's just not going to be very good. Maybe 1 or 2 of these like random guys we have ends up being something, and we sell them to another team who actually wants to like put money into this game. It's just like it's not a good like ecosystem for the league, I would say. And again, I don't know if it's like this in EU or LATAM, but in NA, I do feel like that's kind of what it is right now.
Yeah, I'm fairly sure this isn't a thing in Europe, from what I've heard from teams at least anyway. There's no kind of rumours of any of the players that haven't qualified for the major not being able to, pay their bills or anything because the org isn't paying them. So I don't think it's a Europe-specific thing, although I would say there's probably, people from all regions probably watching how it goes in NA as well and seeing, well, if they're getting away with it, maybe we'll start. So
yeah,
it's probably something that needs thinking about.
I mean, in my opinion, there should be a
scale.
minimum, like, and again, this goes more to Ubisoft, but I feel like there should be like some sort of minimum salary, right? Because if you're in and this is like completely off topic. We'll get back to the predictions in a minute. But like, if you're in NA or if you're in EU, if you're in LATAM, like those teams are in the R6 share.
Yep.
They're getting something back. Like, I know from what I understand, that number like varies like insanely from some teams to others. Like, it's like, to be like, no offense, but if we're comparing like what Mirage get from their R6 share to like what G2 get, it's probably like thousands to a million. You know what I mean? Like, so there is obviously that aspect of it, but these teams aren't just getting nothing. Like, they're getting something. So the idea that they could get by paying like, I don't know the situation, but half the year and the other half they just don't pay money. Like, they're getting money from Ubisoft for something. How can they get away with that? There should be like some sort of minimum requirement so that players aren't in this situation, unless Ubisoft are just trying to steer it towards that situation to like potentially drive down the salaries, which, I mean, maybe makes sense, but yeah.
I think when you get to the point of having, I appreciate we're going off topic, but I think it when you get to the point of having a closed league, right? So these orgs are not in fear of being relegated either.
Right.
That's where you've got this opportunity for them to do stuff like that, right? And that's where you maybe need some regulation, like, hey, these players need to be paid a minimum salary or a minimum, you cannot just be paying them for 3 months of the year or whatever it is.
I mean, at the end of the day, Ubisoft have the right to like remove you from the league. Like, they invite you to the league, they put you in the league. You're in the league because they want you there, but they could change their mind and remove you. And in my opinion, if there's shit like that going on, we're like literally, like, no offense again, I feel like Mirage is always picked on, and in my opinion, deservedly so. But like, Yeti was the MVP of NAL Stage 3. In my opinion, he's made the last 2 SIs over the last 2.5 years. He's made every major besides 2. And he has to retire because he's not getting paid enough money. Like, that is not a player who should be forced, like, just listing those accolades, that is not a player who should be forced to stop playing the game because he can't get paid enough money. Like, that's a good player, and he just is gone because they're not paying him when they don't make a major. So, I mean, that's a problem.
Yeah, and to wrap this point up again, this is what at least I personally, when I heard there was going to be like a 3-month off season, I was excited about, is hopefully we can actually see some action on these issues from Ubisoft or from Blast, whether it be format or issues with the org specifically. That obviously, people at Ubisoft have jobs; they're not just going to be doing nothing during the 3 months. But hopefully, we actually will be able to see some greater conversations, both in public and in private, happen to try and remedy some of these issues or come closer to a solution, now that it isn't just go for the whole year.
Okay, and now let's actually talk about the whole point of the podcast. Sorry for the
what was the point again? I can't remember.
I think it's a major prediction podcast. So real quick, yeah, and I think you're going. But yeah, so for those of you that don't know, the majors are now organized by Blast. This one is in Copenhagen. It starts, this will go up on the 20th, so it'll be the majors in 4 days from now. I think most teams leave tomorrow on the 21st to Copenhagen. And the format has changed pretty drastically. So there is a Phase 2, a Phase 1, and a Phase 3. I don't know why I said it like in a weird number order there. But essentially, the top 2 teams from NA, EU, and Brazil are automatically into Phase 2, which is top 16. And then the winner of the Japan League and the winner of South Korea League, which is the Damwon and Scars, they're also in top 16 automatically. All of the other teams, which is 16 teams, start in Phase 1. So that's top 24, I believe, or just top 24.
Yeah, top 24.
So the majors essentially have been expanded by 8 teams, and a phase has been added. And what that means is obviously there's a more drastic difference in the SI points, which kind of goes back to something we talked about a little bit earlier. But it also means there's a lot of new names, a lot of new faces, and a lot of questions. Because just some of the teams that didn't make this major would be Beast Coast and OXG from NA, Los One from Brazil, BDS, Wild from EU. Am I forgetting anybody else who would be like sort of a front runner from those regions? That's like that you usually see. I feel like those are like the
Like
more
MIBR, maybe.
MIBR. Yeah.
From EU, you're missing Koi as well.
Oh yeah, Koi, of course. Obviously, they lost Spoit, which is, you know, no easy feat to replace. But yeah, so there's a lot of new faces, and there's going to be a lot of questions. And we'll talk about the groups in a second. The way the groups work for the major now is so phase 1, there are 4 teams in each group. They play best of ones until the elimination game, I believe. Are all of the elimination games best of 3s, or just like the final of the lower bracket? I'm actually not sure about that.
That's a good question. I know the finals would be a 3.
According to Liquipedia, all of the lower bracket matches are best of 3s.
Okay.
So all of the elimination games are best of 3s. The other games are not. They're best of 1s. So if you're upper bracket, best of 1. If you lose, best of 3. Which actually I think is pretty good. Because in my opinion, most of the time, it doesn't always happen, but the better team usually will win a best of 3. Just because if you fuck up on a map, you have a bad map, if you know, let's say you play a map and the other team just beats your ass on it, that's not the end of the world. You just win your map and then you win the tiebreaker. So that's actually a good change to me. So the way it works is, like I said, 4 teams start in the upper bracket for each group. 1 team will qualify from that through best of 1s. The teams that lose go to the lower bracket where they play best of 3s, and 1 team will qualify through that. So half of each group make it through to the playoff. Well, I guess I wouldn't call it the playoffs, but phase 2.
The Swiss stage.
Yeah,
the Swiss stage. The Swiss stage, which is 16 teams. And for those of you who are not familiar with Swiss stage, this is how Blast does it in CSGO.
I love Swiss.
I actually think this is I think this will be fun. I think there could be some issues that are caused by it, but we'll see how it works out. I do think it'll get like the better teams generally, but the way it works out is like, so if you're 0-0, you play 0-0 team. 1-0 plays 1-0. 2-0 plays 2-0. And then I think if you get 3 wins, you move on.
Yep.
And those are all best of 1s again.
Yep.
And then the eliminations again are best of 3. But it'll be like, so 0-1 plays 0-1, 0-2 plays 0-2. That'd be best of 3, and then 2-2. So like you get it. I feel like that'll give you probably the best teams. Now I do think there's certain situations where like you could get a scenario where like you win a game, the 0-0 teams get like an easy matchup, and then you just get like, you know, it does come very matchup based because it is random.
Yeah.
Like it's literally. Like, for instance, I don't know who tournament favorites would be. Like, let's just say,
M80.
like M80 Liquid. They could play each other in the first round of Swiss, and then that could just fuck somebody's whole thing up, because then whoever loses that then has to play one of them as an 0-1 team, and then that puts you at 0-2. So there is, like, obviously the potential for that to happen. But at the end of the day, like, again, it is best of 3s when you're faced with elimination. So I feel like you can at least, like, you can salvage something there. But I think it's a very interesting format. And then the top 8 from that go on to phase 3, which is more of what I would say everyone is used to, where it says quarterfinals, semifinals, grand finals, best of 3s, I think best of 5 grand final, and it's just normal playoffs. So basically, there's a more interesting way to get to what we're used to, which I think is a good change. I think it's fun. The major lasts longer. You get to watch more Siege. Now we might have a debate about the quality of Siege we'll be watching, especially during this phase 1. But yeah, so I think from that we can get to Group A, and there's going to be some teams some of us have probably never heard of, or some people listening have definitely never heard of, or some players that you've never heard of. So Group A is Sandbox, who qualified to the South Korea League. Envy Taylor, Good Boy, Mephi, Demic, and Arukaza playing against Fury, who qualified through the Asia LCQ, Dark, Lycolis, BG Man, I9, and Crit J. And then Eminem Gaming, who we know them. It is Usus, Nello, Tyrant, Solotov, and Knopf. Although I will say, we're going to make predictions assuming Solotov can play, but I did see on Twitter there is a chance that Solotov will not be able to get a visa.
Yeah.
And Julio, their coach, would end up playing. That would be a huge hit to Eminem. Solotov is a great player. But for the sake of this, it's not something that's confirmed or anything. We'll just assume Solotov is playing. And then they will be playing Team Falcons, who have a big, I feel like, fan base kind of from their performance last year in Gamers 8.
Yeah.
I did see the same issue with them where Valentino may have a visa problem and he may not be able to play. Obviously, we don't know there, but they do have the, I think the guy who built himself a pretty big fan base is Joker619. He went, like, he was going crazy, I think, at the Gamers 8 last year. So, in my opinion, on like just at first glance, this seems like a walkthrough for Eminem. But they do have to play Falcons first, and Falcons are potentially like a sleeper. Like, some people think they're like really good. What do you guys think about this group?
Me personally, again, it's might be a little, biased for the teams that do well, the teams that are popular, but I am really looking at Eminem Falcons to make it through. The Falcons one is just because of how much hype they've had, and because, admittedly, in like the local Middle Eastern League, how much success they have had over the past year, and once again in the MENA League in 2023. I'm looking at them to make it out of the group, and Sandbox mainly Sandbox for this. I'm not so confident in Sandbox and Fury's performance, especially at, say, Fury at, like, I think it was SI. Though they did end up knocking... Wait, was it Yongshiping or SI where Fury got enough rounds off SSG that they didn't qualify to the playoffs? No, that was Yongshiping, sorry.
That was Yonkoping, or however you pronounce it, I don't care. And I will say they went 0-0-0-6 at that major, but they did win enough rounds to fuck over somebody. And they did qualify through this tournament by the LCQ, where they managed to beat Elevate 2-1 in the finals.
Yeah. And so maybe Fury are a best of 3 team as opposed to a best of 1 team. As I know Connor was talking about, or talking with us before, that it was very surprising that Fury ended up making it through over some of the other teams, or even ended up maybe beating Elevate in the final, even though they both made it through. But I'm not super confident in SBXG just because, every time we saw them last year, it was very underwhelming. Very underwhelming, especially given that some of these players' histories. And Fury has not really put up a lot of convincing performances either, just enough to maybe upset some teams rather than really do anything crazy. So I'm looking at Eminem Falcons as my 2 to make it out from Group A.
I agree. I don't think that's necessarily going to be a hot take, but yeah, I think for Eminem, we're assuming that Eminem, if they've got the full 5, will pretty much walk through this group. I think they probably play the best siege, and I think their front line is very good. But the one thing about Falcons that I've heard, because now Falcons and MENA's kind of been incorporated into the full ecosystem. European teams have got a lot more happy to scrim those guys, despite the ping differences, right? They never used to scrim a lot of the MENA teams because of the ping differences. And I've spoken to about 3 or 4 teams that have scrimmed Falcons that say they play a very meta style of siege. They're very aggressive. They're very confident. And also, they're very used to playing on LAN because the Saudi League is played on LAN. So they've played, the Saudi League, they've played G8. They've got a decent enough amount of experience now. So even though their regional weakest league, their regional league is weak, bloody hell, can't speak. They're actually a very confident team, and there's a lot of people that think they will actually be the surprise package out of stage 1, out of the teams that people don't know, to go quite far in the tournament. For Sandbox, for me, right, is that because obviously I covered APAC North last year, where Sandbox are in it, and they were, unreal through APAC North, qualified to all the majors, and then were awful at every major, which I think is a story for a lot of the APAC teams. But they are continuing to pick up the best players from other teams. They've brought in Mephi, they've brought in Demic, alongside Good Boy, who's like Good Boy was like this like prodigy when he first turned 18. So this was like SI 22. We was hearing about Good Boy's coming in. He's the next Bolo, he's the next Spoit, and he's just never lived up to it internationally. So I will say for them, they've got, I would say in terms of skill, enough to get out of this group. But if it's the same old sandbox, then we might see the same old sandbox. So I think if anybody gets out of the group instead of M&M or Falcons, it will probably be sandbox.
See, I'm in a completely different boat because, I did work South and Southeast Asia, so I have a little bit of bias towards Fury. But overall, watching a team develop significantly is always really satisfying for me. Where Fury were awful in groups. They were bad. They were like got fifth place, and there was a team called Devil Dogs that actually ended up beating them in the seeding on regular groups. And then they go into LCQ after like they had to go through open and then closed and then LCQ. And getting to watch a lot of their games, it was like they were very introspective and fixed a lot of their issues, mainly on how they manage man advantages on the defensive side, because they've always been strong in the sort of roam game and that entry differential. But as soon as they started getting into those harder games of the LCQ, where they had to beat Bleed, who were 7-0, and absolutely stomped everybody in South Asia, they destroyed Shaheens, who I think is a very similar flag to the side of Falcons in how they were dominant and domestic and actually do play a pretty meta-style siege with some slight aggression. I think drawing a comparison between those two teams is very fair. They come out, they beat two 7-0 teams. Fury dominates everybody. They beat Elevate. And overall, I think that they have a really actually good chance, I would say, in a solid second seed behind M&M. And mainly where Fresh, you were talking about how Sandbox keeps on refreshing and bringing in great people. For Fury, they brought somebody named Crit J, who's actually nasty. He is disgusting. And if anybody if I want to put a flag on anybody to kind of watch and be like, hey, this is a dark horse player for the kind of entire region and for the major, I really want to put eyes on him.
Well, to maybe ask you a question, Fresh. So, because I think definitely my order is to Connor's credit. It's like I think it's like M&M 1, Falcons 2, Fury 3, Sandbox 4.
Yeah.
How much do you think that Falcons being able to scrim EU teams more often, and not only the region being able to scrim EU teams more often, but Falcons being the best team in MENA being able to scrim them? Do you think that might be a big difference maker against like say Fury or Sandbox or even M&M?
I think so. I think, they will be much more comfortable because like the way that I just had Connor speak about Fury, for example, is the same way that I saw APAC North last year. Is like when you're in the region, you see them and you're like, oh, these guys are class. And then you see them at an international event and they're just not, right? And I think it's kind of the same. So for Falcons, if they're not just scrimming the MENA teams, if they've got, BDS, G2, Wolves, Koi, all these teams scrimming them, from Europe, and they're able to get them. They're already exposed to like an international brand of Siege, if you want to have it that way. And the fact that they have played G8, they've got that experience. So I would say they're going to be very comfortable, getting out there and playing international teams. Obviously, they won't have played any of the APAC teams, but yeah.
I will say, at least for it kind of sounds weird to say because Falcons have never played at obviously this is their first opportunity to play any kind of major or anything. But they still had more international success than Sandbox, who make every major ever have.
That's true.
At Gamers 8. Now, I will say, maybe you say it's a home field advantage or whatever, and I also don't know how. I think teams woke up a little bit, but I don't know how serious teams were taking Falcons at Gamers 8, right? Yeah. They're gonna take Falcons serious at this tournament for sure. But even still, at Gamers 8. Falcons beat MIBR, who, to be honest, were not good last year, so that's kind of whatever. But they did beat TSM. Now, I mean, you could honestly maybe say the same thing about TSM. They weren't that good last year. Then they beat Wild, who I think we've seen are actually pretty solid. And then they lost 3-0 to BDS. They played BDS twice. They lost 5-0 maps. Now, a couple of the maps were close. They had 8-7, 8-7, 7-5 in the finals. But I mean that shows me that they're still a different level maybe. Now obviously Falcons could have improved since then, but they didn't win a map off of BDS in two different matches, and they were able to beat some teams that we know, MIBR and TSM and Wild, but that was a different Wild than they were this year. They had different players, and MIBR and TSM, as we know, maybe have good players on their teams, but they weren't good teams necessarily last year. Now they still have good players, and you still have to be good enough to like beat those teams. But I think Falcons make it out of this group as well, along with Eminem, obviously. But I do think there is a chance Falcons could be overrated a little bit. I guess it's going to remain to be seen. Because there's a lot of hype because we saw them, do what they did. But there is cause to like kind of say, wait a minute, They did struggle against the real good team that was at that event, in my opinion. Like, the teams that were there were not the best, I would say. BDS were clearly, like, I would say, on another level than those other teams, and they pretty much got stomped by BDS. So I do think there's, like, a little bit of, like, cause for concern with them, but I still think they make it out just because, to be honest, I hear your points about Fury, I hear your points about Sandbox. It almost makes me think of when I was still playing and I would scrim against Challenger League players. You would think that I was like Grixer. Because I would like, I don't know if you've seen like any scrim clips from me or something, but I would like shit on those guys. Like even like, they're obviously good pro team now, but like Mr. B's team who like ran CL, like I would like run those guys in scrims. And it was simply because like my team was better. I'm just always put in better positions where it's like easier gunfights, right? I feel like it's the same thing with these teams. It's like they're just better than the, they have, like you said, these teams bring in all the best players in these regions or whatever, but the regions as a whole aren't very good.
Yeah.
So they're kind of just like picking on these teams, and then they play people who are just as skilled as them or more skilled as them, or they can't just bully around and get to wherever they need to be on the map. And all of a sudden, it's like, well, you're not taking such an easy gunfight anymore.
Yeah.
And then it's like reality check. And I kind of feel like that's what happens. Is like, it's not like they're any worse. It's just that all of a sudden, they're not getting the same situations that they're getting in their own region. Or like, for me, against a T2 team. And it plays out completely differently. Yeah, go ahead, sir.
Oh no, that's fine. And also to specifically like Sandbox and Fury, because I think last year, but also in many years before, like APAC has always gotten this reputation, similar to how like LATAM used to be in like 2018, 2019, of like, oh, yeah, they're inconsistent, but they're super crazy in the lobby, and not like crazy like good, just like crazy like you don't know what the hell they're gonna do. Like I always go back to this because it's the classic example of like Anaton like QE spamming skies in blue on Chalet. Like, how the hell are you going to predict that, like, going into a game? Like, you can eventually become wise to it, but it's a different thing competing against it. But I don't really feel like Sandbox or Fury ever really exhibited that level of kind of, like, frontline aggression. It just felt like they were kind of asleep during a lot of their international performances, and a lot of the only teams who carried that kind of, like, characteristic of APAC that they could catch you off guard was, like, Cyclops, and they're not at the event. And I don't think Sandbox or Fury ever really had that super well. I might be wrong, but that's why I also don't think that these two APAC teams in particular, I think, are going to do well. I'm not confident that Sandbox or Fury as teams.
I made this point a while ago, and I think it kind of, what you just said reminded me of a little bit of it. Is like, so like 2 years ago when Cyclops kind of came out of nowhere and they were having better performances. Now they still didn't make it out of groups, but like, they definitely should have in like Mexico. They played a style that was very like ahead of meta almost. Like they were super aggressive. They did super random plays. They were rushing, bringing all these kind of crazy ops. And like you just were not used to playing against it. So if it's like your first, like I said this even like last year, I think XSET or M80 when they were still XSET, they had to play Cyclops in group. And like their first time playing them, they lost to them. Because you didn't know. Unless you've played them, you don't know how they play. But the game is now, we're like, that's the meta. Like, everybody plays like that. So now they're just playing the meta. A lot of these teams, they're on meta, but now they're just not as good as the meta that they kind of created, if that makes sense. Because the other teams they honestly have better players a lot of the time. And like, that's what I kind of think has happened, is where it's like, APAC was actually ahead of the meta a little bit, or at least some of the teams, and now that has become the meta, and they've fallen behind their own meta, in a manner of speaking. So now we can move on to Group B. I think we all, besides CDaps, picked Eminem Falcons for Group A.
Yeah, I have Falcons in third, to be fair. I think it is a variable between 2 and 3, but I give Fury a slight edge.
This group is kind of interesting to me. I feel like we're all probably going to be on the same page with who makes it out, but I could see like reasonings for why not. So it's NIP, who came through the LCQ. And let me pull it up real quick. I'll just name the rosters because a lot of these teams have different players. They have Psycho, Muzi, Pino, Wizard, and Cons. So if you haven't been following Siege for a while, you might be like, who the hell is like half that team? But they came through the LCQ after honestly a pretty poor league stage. 6K, who is Morphed, Skimzy, Akabil, Soko, and Pachito. They are from LATAM, which last year would have been like MXPL. I feel like 6K, in my opinion, have been the best MXPL team since MXPL has been a thing.
100%.
They've also kind of like what you guys were saying with APAC is like they kind of just have been picking up the best players from that region to like form like a regional super team almost. And then SSG, which is Fultz, Hot and Cold, Forest, J9, Merc. So it's like a combo of old SSG, old Astralis, and Merc randomly there from TSM. And then Elevate. I looked at this roster and I was like, what the hell? Ape, Barcode OP, Speakeasy, Tolji, and Healthcare OG. The GOAT name, Healthcare OG.
Goat.
Yep.
But like, I didn't even realize they had that many different players on their team now.
Yeah, they're a combination of like the remnants of Invictus and Gaming Gladiators.
And they
That's
also
how they
came
just kinda-
through LCQ. So 6K and SSG came through like their leagues, and then Elevate and NIP came through LCQ. What are we thinking about this group?
I'm such an NIP hater. It's just I'm so down on NIP. And it's pure it's not even logical. Like it's purely personal cuz like back when I was just watching Siege as a fan during SI 2020, I kind of wanted NIP to win because I wanted the LATAM team to win, which is a little bit traitors to my region, I know. And I was very happy in SI 2021 where it was Liquid and NIP and NIP won. And then like they sucked for a tournament. I was like, all right, it's fine. And they sucked for another tournament. I was like, all right, this is getting worrying. And then they've sucked for 2 years now. And then even in the Brazil regular season, they looked very poor. And they were able to make it through, open qualifier playoffs. They were able to make it through LCQ. But it's still...
They finished last place in their region.
So, not great. Connor, I think you can agree with that assessment as well. But I'm just... Part of me wants to put 6K over NIP. And I don't know if it's rational or not. But part of me wants to. And I don't...
It depends on what NIP you look at. Because for me, I almost... Like, in a similar vein to Fury, like, watching a team fix all their issues, NIP is just what Fury did cranked up to, like, 50, because holy crap, did they suck during groups. It was horrible. I was just sitting there on the desk like, these guys are awful. They are horrible players. Like, what the heck happened to NIP? Like, their org needs to drop them. Like, what happened? And then they come in through LCQ, and it's like a completely different team. They're still playing in strong-ish rosters, like in the form of like Magic Squad and stuff like that, where they were struggling against them in the regular season. But then they fixed a lot of issues, and kind of the only issue that has persisted, which I think can get them in a lot of trouble, is how they play with their man advantage. I think they have one of the lowest conversion rates across like both sides of the board from any of the data I've tracked. At like, if they win the opening pick, it's a dead-ass coin flip. So that's not necessarily the best thing in the world. And when you match up a team like SSG, who I have as a really high resiliency because they can fight back for a pick and get very aggressive if they need to, it really kind of comes down to, in my eyes for this group, of how are Elevate going to do? Because they're still a completely different roster where they might have a little bit. Yeah.
I was just going to say, like, Elevate, I actually think are ass. So I don't know why the region was made this way, but so they didn't even win the LCQ. They got second, and they still made the major. And yeah, you can, but I was just going to point out that like we were just kind of like shitting on Fury for how they go to the majors and just get like dumped on and whatever. Elevate lost to Fury in the finals of the LCQ. So they made the major by not even winning the LCQ and losing to a team who we all think are probably not going to do that well. That doesn't inspire much confidence. And it this is not going with that. This is not the Elevate that is super experienced internationally. It's a completely different team.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So my faith in them is not high.
Yeah, but for South and Southeast Asia, essentially they were kind of paired as one league, one on Saturday, one on Sunday together, same broadcast team. But the closed league itself didn't give a major spot. So the LCQ was just the top 4 from South Asia and the top 4 from Southeast Asia, and they gave 2 spots. So it was kind of essentially the LCQ for that region was kind of like what we saw with playoffs for NAL and EUL. If that makes more sense.
So it was, I mean, I guess it makes sense, but these are the teams in that qualifier. Bleed, Won't Stop Peaking, Shaheens, Fury, Direwolves, Galida, Elevate, and the Monkey Hunters. So the Elevate made the major by beating the Monkey Hunters 2-1, and then Direwolves.
Now to be fair, VBM, the former coach of PB, claims that Jittery is one of the nastiest mechanical players in the entire world. So that might be a very impressive
Where's
win.
Where's that getting him?
Hey, he didn't play. He didn't play the first map because his internet went out monsoon season. Okay.
So they could have. Okay, yeah. So then they could have literally lost to the Monkey Hunters.
Yeah, that's why I think Elevator getting grouped.
Okay. Well. All right, back on topic. There you go.
Elevate. Apparently they potentially have visa issues as well, which is
surprise
because they got 7 days.
Well,
yeah.
That's not necessarily true because the major was in Copenhagen before the stage even started.
Yeah, you're supposed to apply and get everything rolling before.
In theory, and again, I feel like I'm like a Ubisoft defender in this podcast so far.
What a shill.
Thank you for putting us in the T1 R6 share, by the way. But to be fair, Ubisoft tells the teams where the major is, obviously, as a whoever the staff is for the org should be okay, this player needs visas. You can apply ahead of time. Now that doesn't always mean they'll approve you ahead of time because sometimes they might ask for well, why? They're like, well, we could qualify for this tournament, but you could just apply ahead of time and see what happens. They haven't been doing that. But back to the prediction.
Yeah. I think for me, your point, Carter, about Six Karma was interesting, right? But if you look back over the last 2 years, right, and the way that Brazil used to be and LATAM, so it used to be that Brazil would provide 4 teams to Copa Elite 6, Mexico would provide 2, Argentina would provide 2, right? So Six Karma have played against Brazilian teams a bunch of times, and then have lost every single time.
That's a good point.
The fact that Six Karma have been paired up against NIP in that first game makes me feel that, although it is a best of 1, but it makes me feel that NIP will beat them. Yeah. So I think you're probably looking at a situation, it's not inconceivable that you would see NIP beat Six Karma, SSG beat Elevate, SSG beat NIP, and then Six Karma have to play NIP in a best of 3 to go out or go through in that lower bracket final. So I would like to see Six Karma do well because I've cast them a couple of times in qualifiers and other stuff as well. But I think it's probably going to be NIP and SSG that go through. Six Karma and Elevate to go out.
I do want to ask this, and that's a very good point, Fresh. But I do want to ask this because I think we are just kind of assuming that SSG will make it out. But how are we feeling about SSG going into the tournament? I mean, obviously, I think we're gonna make it out, but
so in my opinion, yeah, I guess that goes back to what you just said. So in my opinion, even if you don't think SSG are coming into this that strong, they're still better than the group, I feel like. So I personally didn't I didn't care about the Gamers 8 thing for our team. And I know people might look at SSG and say, well, and Gamers 8 they lost to like a pickup team, basically, like Kool-Aid's team. They got like 7 forward by them in Gamers 8, and then didn't play the second Gamers 8. And then before that, they started off, I would say, like hot, and then they got 2-0'd. Well, they got 14-3'd by M80 as the number 1 seed, and then they beat Beast Coast 8-7, 7-4, and qualified. So, like, I wouldn't necessarily say that I feel like SSG are coming in like top form, but I still think they are a good team. They have everybody on their roster are literally extremely experienced internationally. They've all had great success internationally. Like, I don't think you can doubt them. Like, this reminds me of Astralis last SI, where, like, if you talk to anyone from NA going into SI, everyone thought Astralis was, like, dog shit. Like, that they were horrible. And then they end up getting top 4.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, I just think this group, you know, they have the Astralis coach call out. They've got Forrest and J9 from Astralis. Like, obviously it's a different mix, but I do think that they are a team that, like, at least it's been proven that at least some of their players rise to, like, the occasion, regardless of, like, what was happening beforehand.
I also think as well, and I guess as probably the only non-North American here, when I watched NAL, obviously there was a lot of change, right? Like, you guys went back from LAN to online, but also the fact that you had to play 4 best-of-1s over 2 days was, like, for me, it's very hard to judge a team when they're having to back it up just so frequently as well.
Yeah.
So for me, there's maybe some, and SSG could be one of those where it's kind of like, yeah, they struggled, they had to get into the phase 1 slot, but it doesn't mean they're a bad team, because obviously it was still a new mix. They were still having to play, back-to-back best-of-1s, whatever. And I think, with time and experience, especially with the people that they brought in, that Australia's core, I think they'll be all right. And like I say, I think they're better than the rest of the group, even if they're not in a hot runner form.
I just felt like we had to talk about them. Like, we couldn't just say
Yeah.
nothing about them. We
I mean, I can't believe none of you guys brought up the Black Air Force One energy, because they're looking fresh.
They
We
are.
got the whole squad on deck for that. But I would say SSG 1 slot, Nippon 2 slot, pretty easy in my eyes. Just kind of open shut case.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think because the upper game is a best of 1, like if NIP are like maybe coming in hot, they could get the 1 seed. But yeah, I think either NIP 1, SSG 2, or SSG 1, NIP 2 is. I'm decently confident that.
I think SSG wins this group. I think NIP will get second, but I do think NIP have shown us such different forms. Like, one form of where they are, like, legitimately the worst team in their region, and one form where they're winning a qual. I do feel like if they because that could have just been a couple of hot days, right? Like, I do think if they revert to more of their league form, 6K could definitely beat them. Because obviously we scrim 6K a bit, and I think there are some maps that 6K are definitely a T1 like level team on, and I think there are some maps where 6K would struggle to beat like CL teams, right? So if they, and like, I'm not going to talk about that obviously, but if they get like the maps that are good for them, because remember, there's not a lot of info that NIP's going to have on like 6K here. So like, because they didn't play LCQ or anything, like, so you don't know what they're doing. So I do feel like if they get a good set of maps, or if NIP's reverted back to like league form, 6K could beat them for sure. Because I know 6K in the past have lost to the Brazilian teams, but you got to remember, like, that was a bit of a different format. I think those Brazilian teams are more top of the league. NIP's not necessarily top of the league, and 6 Karma have made roster changes since then. They brought in the GOAT Akabil. So, like, I feel like this is a group where I do think there is, like, good, I wouldn't say good chance, but it would not surprise me if 6K sneaked out. I don't think Elevate have a chance in hell. I think they're last, but I think they're last, SSG are first, and NIP probably gets second, but maybe like 30% chance that 6K gets second.
Fresh has heard more Akibiel praise in the past 2 or 3 days, by the way, than he ever has.
He's
before.
never even heard that name before. He thinks it's like, all right. Okay, so moving on to Group C. We have, hold on, let me pull this up so I can talk about the teams. We have
It's your group.
Yep. So I won't really predict this one. I'll just let you guys talk about it.
Yep.
But because I'm biased, obviously. Look at the hat. But we've got Northeption, who I believe won the Japan League.
Yep.
Babar, Nina, Shu Reap, Yuki's, and Seo-chan. We have La Vega Esports, who came from the South Korea LCQ. They have Crown, not from League. D-Mally, Guard, Marine, and I believe Wally. And then we have Revan from the LATAM LCQ, which is Runner, Joe, Sam, Draw, and Wraith.
LATAM.
And then,
First seed.
obviously, we've already talked about it. My team, Sonics, Grixer, Rexen, Geo, Gunner, Citizen. What are you guys thinking here?
Super mid SQ. Just not good.
Fair.
Bottom of the barrel team. Also, just to clarify, it was Scars that won Japan League.
Yes,
So
it
did
was.
these? So
So the way it worked, Japan League, like it was similar to NAL. Scars and Northeption played in a
they sent
B-
2 teams.
they played in a
No, they sent
BO5.
3.
Yeah, they sent 3.
There's only 8 teams in
you're
the
for-
league. Why are
you're-
they sending
you're for-
3 teams?
You're forgetting about Varel.
Yeah.
He made
Okay.
Happy.
Morel Donuts.
Great
yeah.
song.
I have to ask, what Northeption? I'm looking at it. Went 1 and 2 in the Japanese league, but I have to ask, why are they sending 3 teams out of their league? There's only 8.
There's only 8 in the NAL.
Okay, the NAL has established history of success internationally, and the teams cost hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Listen, it's simple math. You know, you got
That
8
makes
here, you got
no
8 there.
sense. Now, to their credit, they did beat Cyclops. I don't know if CAG was just not good this stage, but they did beat Cyclops in the playoffs.
I was about to say the interesting thing about Japan actually, if you look at the APAC North teams from last year, Cyclops, Fnatic, and Fav, because Reject fell apart, those 3 teams actually all shit the bed, and none of them are coming to the major.
Yeah.
So, you know, the Japan league is quite hotly contested. But yeah, just wanted to say that.
All right, back to your predictions. That was just mind blowing. That I didn't realize they were sending 3 teams.
Personally, I mean, I know Connor's a big La Vega fan, so you know we can go to him about all of our La Vega needs. But I think it's probably gonna be. I think Sonics are probably gonna make it. This isn't just because I'm on your show.
Thank you.
I just. Jack, do I have to say Revan second seed? Do I need to?
If you want to.
But I don't know if I want to. That's the problem. I don't know if I want to.
Gun to your head. Who's making it out?
Honestly, this is. Go on, actually, say it.
Ah, no! Somebody get me off the hook. You know what? I'm gonna say Northeption.
Okay. Look, for me, I think night and day, clearly, obviously, Sonics are the best team in that group. I don't even want to be watching your co-streams if you don't get through that group quite comfortably, to be honest, Seth.
I do want to watch your co-streams if you don't make it.
Yeah.
through.
Yeah.
The thing is that you see on the timeline a lot of times, actually, about, how, there's obviously a lot of hot debate about APAC as a region, how many spots they get at majors, etc. And I've seen a lot of times people from EU say, our Challenger League teams could beat them. So we've now got a situation where one of our Challenger League, well, not even teams, a group of lads that play Challenger League have now gone over to Mexico and, gone and played in the LATAM League, have qualified. They're now going to be up and playing against them in the major. So we've got that situation where, these guys, Joe was playing in Challenger League last year, so was Sam, and Draw as well. They were all playing in EUCL, last year. And then obviously Runner's quite new to the scene, and Raf has been in and around the last time I've seen a while. So I don't know where they're going to stand, to be honest, because they play a very, very aggressive style. I mean, any team with Joe in it is going to play an aggressive style of Siege, and it could well catch them off. But I watched Northeption a little bit through the Japan League and also through when they played in the Japan Invitational as well, and they are, I would say, a decent enough team. So if I had to pick a second, I'm kind of the same as you, Carter. I'm kind of the same as, I think Sonics will piss through the league. I think it'll be fairly straightforward just to first place. I think the second place is the one where it's a little bit difficult to call. But I'm going to back my LATAM/European boys of Revan to go through.
I think it's very fair to do that. I mean, Sonics, like we don't even need to talk about Sonics, and I'm sure Supr is happy that we wouldn't be cursing them. But I think between Northception and La Vega, things get kind of interesting. Where La Vega, sure, they had some domestic success, but Northception, they didn't really have that much success. They really struggled in the format that we saw in their league. So I must just want to write them off completely because I think Japan might be an overrepresented region as a whole, and we might figure that out just as these teams start coming through. But when we talk about Revan, it's like you said, they want to play a very, very aggressive style of siege, and I think that that will get them an initial hit on Northception in that best of one series. I think will help them out, and then with the potential longevity of a La Vega team that map pool wise didn't seem that strong. They really heavily crutched a couple of maps through their run. I think even with Revan maybe even getting an initial hit once again, an initial surge on map 1 in a series might be enough on the elimination best of 3. That kind of slots them into the second spot and makes them win.
Well, I think, but I think the Revan versus really APAC matchup in general, but specifically Revan and Northception in this case is super interesting. Not only because of what Fresh said of just like the constant adage that RCL teams could beat your APAC teams, but also that Revan do play a very aggressive style, but they've also shown in LATAM that kind of ability to reset after maybe an early victory, not only in terms of like a man advantage, but also like an early round count lead, can slip away sometimes in dramatic fashion. I think like I didn't watch a lot of LATAM just because I was doing NAL and university, but I think they choked like a 5-round lead or something like that, or choked a dramatic lead at one point, like during a game, and that has happened a few times. Not necessarily like 5 or 6 rounds, but still like 2 or 3 of that sort of thing. And I do think that in a game and against a region that can also throw man advantages and throw round count leads, that they could find themselves, if they aren't being able to play disciplined and reset, that Northception or some of the other APAC teams could exploit that. And so I think that's one concern that I have for not only for the APAC teams, but for Revan as well, that if the practice isn't solid and that kind of the ability to just like calm down after an advantage isn't there, that Northception or maybe some other APAC or aggressive LATAM teams could exploit that and just kind of run over them.
Okay, so are you all going Sonics Revan?
I'm
Is that
saying
right?
Sonic's Northception.
Okay. All right.
That's my hot take.
Okay.
Ooh.
So then Group D, we've got W7M, Herds, Keys, JV92, Philippox, I guess is how you
Philippox.
pronounce it.
Philippox.
Yeah.
Philippox and Nade. Team Bliss, which is from Australia, I believe.
Yes.
Oda, Fisho Guy, Brendo, Jigsaw, and Sejan. Wolves, who came from the LCQ, Bibu, Mowgli, P4, Shinka, and Deadshot. And Veril, who came from the Japan LCQ, Double D, Ayakuyu, Ayokayu, Kawa, Rento, and Okomesh. What are you guys thinking here? Because I feel like this one might be the most straightforward group.
How the hell did we get Kanto, Kento, and now Rento? How has this happened in Rainbow Six?
See, you don't understand that.
To me, this group is the easiest to call of all of them. I feel like.
Well, to prolong you calling it for a little bit longer, Oceania, because I want to talk about Team Bliss for a second. Oceania is an interesting example because I don't think they actually had a playoffs.
Nope.
No.
Was it? So yeah, so Team Bliss went flawless.
7-0.
Yeah, 7-0 in their regional league. But I'm pretty sure, they just won 7 best of ones and made it in. Which still they won 7 best of ones and didn't drop a single one. And that's, credit where credit is due. But like this season, they have not played a best of 3 in like an official Ubisoft competition. So I just wanted to get that interesting tidbit out there before we.
Well, I'm also like looking at the teams in that region, and none of the players on the other teams that I'm seeing are like the players I'm familiar with.
Yeah,
Like
even like
bouncing balls and shit. Like he's not even on one of these teams, so I don't even know like who they're playing against.
Homeless, apparently.
I guess.
Yeah, it's always going to be a rough one, right? It's like, and it's the same story for a lot of these Asian Pacific teams, but especially the way the OCE scene kind of got, fucked with APAC North, APAC South. It's always going to be, it's very similar to Falcons in terms of MENA just, pissing through the league and qualifying. I think they're up against it in terms of Team Bliss. Congrats to them qualifying. I think they will struggle. Although I will say that I'm a big fan of Jigsaw, who plays for Team Bliss. As far as I understand it, I don't know if it was ever officially announced, but I'm fairly sure he was going to sign for Fnatic at one point before they went down the route of going for all the Japanese players as well. So I think he's a very good player, and there's a couple of names on their team that, probably long overdue attending international events from OCE. That being said, they're up against W7M starting off. That's, it's probably only going to go one way. Now, obviously W7M aren't the W7M of 6 months ago. They've lost, people. But adding in Philippox for me is a big one because, he was a star player for a long time on MIBR, right? So it's kind of like, I think W7M will go through the group. Wolves are in a really interesting one as well.
I wanted to ask you about them specifically.
Yeah, so Wolves for me, right, is they obviously replaced Rise, got rid of the old man, and added in Deadshot. Now, it was kind of rumored for a long time during the off-season that Deadshot was going to be going to BDS. And that was basically the rumor. So I don't know if Wolves kind of just maybe got baited or took the bait or just decided, right, we want to get this guy in so BDS doesn't, whatever. But they brought in Deadshot. Now, the one thing that I think it was a lot of short-term pain because I don't think they realized how much actual leadership Rise gave them. Not in terms of like being an in-game leader, but in terms of just being a leader amongst the team. And also during the games when you looked at Wolves, Rise was always the guy that was making them make plays together, right? He was like, if we need to retake a position, if we need to do this, he was forcing them to go with him, and he would often just bait himself out so that his teammates could get the kills and whatever. So his stats weren't the best, but they certainly weren't the worst on the team, and I think he added a lot outside of the team. So I don't know what went on, but anyway, Deadshot comes in, and then the thing that happened with Wolves is kind of Mowgli, because of that change, then just became unleashed. And Mowgli, you let him go off, and he'll go on, and he'll get you a 4K, or he'll lose you the round. It's kind of one or the other with him. And that's what we saw with Wolves right at the start. And then they started to find the rhythm of just allowing Mowgli to go and play his game and then playing a 4v5 like we're kind of used to seeing Wolves play. And they came in strong through the last chance qualifiers. So I know it seems very simple that Wolves will probably be the second team out, but they do have I would say a soft underbelly at the moment that they could be upset quite quickly if things went badly.
I think for me, like even in that group, I feel like that may be the case, but I feel like that group specifically, the other teams are like pretty weak in comparison. Yeah. I feel like Veral qualified for this through, I guess they're the third Japanese team to qualify through this.
Yeah, they beat CAG, right?
Yeah, yes, they beat CAG 2-1 in the finals of the LCQ. Before that, in the they qualified through the qualifier playoffs. And I think from there they were in the Japanese League deciders where they were 2-1. They beat Fnatic. Oh no, they were 1-2 and beat Fnatic, I guess. So I mean,
I actually forgot Fnatic were like in the scene, by the way.
Yeah, I kind of thought they left.
They keep hitting the head against the wall with Japanese rosters. They just
I'm gonna be honest, they're just sticking around for that R6 share at this point. Like I don't think they care what's going. They probably don't even know they have a team anymore at this point.
As long as they have an anime skin, it's all good.
Yeah. But yeah, I feel like that one's a little cut and dry. So then I think that leads us to phase 2, and just to go back through. For Group A, I believe everyone besides CDaps predicted Eminem Falcons. I think CDaps predicted Eminem Fury.
Yes.
For Group B, everyone predicted NIP SSG. For Group C, everyone, you three, not me, I don't predict, predicted Sonics. Yeah. And Revan, besides Lynnx, predicted Sonics Northeption. And then Group D, everyone predicted W7M Wolves. So if we just go by, I guess you would say, the majority rules, Phase 2 would be, and these are the teams now that I'll talk about that are already Phase 2. So they've just been waiting, watching these games, basically. M80, which won NAL, or whatever they call it now. Dios, Gomez, Kino, Iconic, Spoit, Dark Zero, NJR, Panba, Canadian, Gavini, Achieved, G2, Virtue, Alamau, Doki, Blur, and Benja. Virtus Pro, Pasha, Always, Dan, Joystick, Shepherd, FaZe, Cyber, Souls, Vita King, Handy, KDS, Liquid, Nesk, Palu, Resets, Lagonis, Volps, D Plus or Damon Kia in the past, Yas, Coded, Woogieman, Harper, and Soldier, and Scars, Fishlike, Pion, Tayo GA33, WQ
Yo.
WQSYO 1, and Rec. So
I'm
those
so,
are the
I'm so excited to cast that name, by the way. Like, you don't understand.
WQS, yo. And then so those are the 8 teams. And then through our predictions, if we go by majority, they'll be joined by Eminem, Wolves, SSG, Sonics, W7M, NIP, Falcons, and Revan. So, I guess the question is, of the Phase 2 teams that are in there, because in theory, those are the better teams. They qualified like top 2, I guess, in their region or won the region. Which of those are you thinking probably don't make it out of Phase 2? Like, so we know the 8 teams that we're putting in. Who from the Phase 1, 8, is moving up to take a spot from Phase 2, and who from Phase 2 is dropping and not keeping their spot? So only half the teams make it out. There's 8 there. 8 move on.
I think we can go ahead and continue our APAC hate train and just wipe Scars and D plus. You know, they just throw them out.
So just to like talk about them like even briefly, if we're just gonna throw them to the side. D plus, they did win South Korea League, where I believe they went. Oh, they actually were 2-1. But then they ended up winning the qualifier by beating Sandbox 2-0 in the final.
And they didn't drop a map during playoffs either.
Yeah, that is correct. They went 6-0 in the playoffs in the South Korea League. And then Scars, they qualified by winning the Japan League, I believe.
Yes.
They were 2-1 in the league itself, and then they won the playoffs. They actually lost a map every single round of the playoffs, but they still won it. They beat Veril 2-1, they beat IG Zis 2-1, and they beat Northeption 3-1. Which I don't know how much that match mattered, because in the Japan League, both those teams already had qualified for the major, so I don't know.
But I mean, that's the difference between Phase 2 and Phase 1, so that's pretty
I guess,
significant.
yeah, that's
that
true.
one's enough.
Okay, so those are the 2 APAC teams. If we're throwing them to the side, does anybody here want to fight for their life to party?
No.
I thought you were gonna be the one to do it.
Pressure's like Scars all the way. Finals.
The thing is, right, it's for D plus. Objectively, the players they brought in from the players they had last year are worse. But I think maybe they've got a bit more confidence about them this stage. I still think we're going to see the same D plus / Damwon Kia that we saw, starting in Berlin last year, where it fell off hard. As much as they were good domestically, Scars are a team that I think are. If I was to pick one of the APAC teams, it would be Scars that I think could upset. But the fact that they're playing, if we was playing the GSL groups like we are in Phase 1, then yeah, I would say maybe they've got a shot. I think the fact that it's going to be Swiss and they're going to be up against probably a team that's far better than them with a bigger map pool in a best of 3, even if it gets
Yeah.
to an elimination match, I think is unfortunately going to probably be the undoing of Scars. So no, I'm not going to back any AFAC.
Okay,
And-
so then, oh, go ahead, Link. Sorry.
No, I was gonna say, and it really depends on like what the matchups actually are, because
Yeah, that's why it does make it hard to predict, because obviously, as we talked about like at the beginning of this, you could technically get fucked and have like a couple of hard matchups.
Mhm.
But in theory, if that doesn't like fuck your mental, you can still, if you're a better team, you still can win just best of 3s and make it out.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because I do think it is like possible, and possible not in like the very remote possibility sense, but possible like there's a genuine possibility that like say like obviously we don't have Northampton making out of groups, but like let's say like another APAC team makes it out of group, Scar is able to beat them, they then move up a stage, maybe it's another close game, but they make it further. It'd be very difficult, but they could get very blessed with the bracket and maybe fight like an
Yeah.
APAC team or a LATAM team, and then maybe like a Wolves who have that weak underside and like that kind of hot and cold performance that Fresh was talking about. I
He's
think
on
it's
SSG.
possible, but I think it's possible that they could get a bracket that, or could get a set of matchups that get them there, but is that enough to like predict them making it out on? Not really, no.
Yeah.
So if we eliminate D plus and Scars, that opens up 2 spots for Phase 1 teams. Is there anybody else out of, at this point, which would be M80, DZ, Liquid, Phase, Virtus Pro, and G2? Is there anybody there that we want to eliminate, or that we think is like weak where they could lose to some of the Phase 1 teams?
I'm decently confident in all the teams, but the one I do want to ask about, and Connor, maybe you could speak on this, is FaZe. Because FaZe did not look great at SI with Vidaking, and now
Yeah.
they look significantly better. So what can you kind of tell us about how FaZe has progressed within the Brazil League so far?
Yeah, so I would say overall, it's not only just Faye and just Vidaking, but KDS I think has really found his footing in an overall like boots on the ground entry, getting the specific map control that's necessary for his team, especially on the attacks, which is probably where we would say the most struggles we had with FaZe at SI was. So slowly just fixing those issues has been kind of nice for a progression wise for them, as well as really jumping over hurdles of kind of expectations where everybody's like, okay, Liquid got Volps, so like they're probably gonna just wipe everybody in Brazil. But then they not only beat them in the regular season, but then also beat them in playoffs in the grand final, which was interesting enough where you can almost just say that, yeah, FaZe is just a definitively better team than Liquid. And Liquid should also just kind of be like, yeah, they're just gonna take W7M's spot where they were runners up at the major because they took Volps and they were already right there on the cusp. They should be doing good, but overall, I've really liked FaZe Clan and even Handy. Handy has been a very versatile player that they've been able to utilize. That is another one of those kind of like dark horse players that I would want to highlight in on, because once you get into Phase 2, sure, like I guess you can always say, like when me and Jacob were on the desk, it was like, yeah, you can't talk about FaZe without talking about Cyber, because I think the Cyber Zero form, especially what we saw in playoffs, is back. I think he went like plus 35 in the grand finals, which was ridiculous. So yeah, I think FaZe out of all the LATAM teams are in the 1 seed for a reason and would have the best shot.
All right.
There's a lot of debate in a lot of, especially because they've played the Gamers 8 or the GWB qualifiers, about Virtus Pro. Saw it on the timeline a couple of days ago. Because obviously they were, our number 1 seed out of Europe, and there's a lot of teams that believe that this is actually a very bad team, and they should be very easy to beat. Because they play such an off-meta brand of Siege. It's it's the Virtus Pro Team Empire of old, basically, still, where every attack is a full clear, every defense is basically a turtle with a lot of utility inside a site, and they play very compact, they play very close to each other, and they don't really give you any freebies. It's very different from today's meta. Now, a lot of the European teams just played kind of today's meta, a lot of split theory against them, a lot of individual Siege against them, and got punished. Whereas if you look at when BDS played them, BDS, it's kind of weird. If you watch the BDS VP game, BDS had 7-0 TT9 on Cafe by getting really aggressive in the faces, just denying the entry points. 1 week, and then or the next day, whatever it was, they then followed it up against VP, defending Cafe, but they had a completely opposite game plan. They just basically gave them the whole map, but just played time basically as the win condition. And I think if teams wise up on how VP play, there's a lot of opportunity to beat them. But if teams are stubborn about it and want to just play that team style, then they can be beat. So there's a world where I see VP potentially being, going out in phase 2, but I think it's so dependent on the other teams that it's very hard to call that they will be going out in phase 2, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen that discussion where I think maybe Doki was talking about it, how like you watch them play and like watch their strats and you don't know how they're winning.
Yeah.
But then you look at their players and they have very good players, obviously. Some of the best players to ever play the game on that team. And history-wise, like the old Empire, they always powered up on land. Because from what I understand, it is difficult for them playing online from their location. So, like, maybe they get a little bit of a boost there. But I do also, especially, like, because outside of your elimination game, a lot of these are best of ones. I do think that Virtus Pro could be put in some weird positions depending on who they play. Because certain teams maybe won't change their style for them, but certain teams, like, for instance, the way Liquid play, I think Liquid would be like a super difficult matchup for them. And they wouldn't really even have to change a lot. Whereas, like, or Dark Zero would be a super difficult matchup for them because they're more. I think even us would potentially be a difficult matchup for them because we're more like those teams are more methodical rather than like running around. And that's, I feel like, probably what Virtus Pro struggles with. I know Virtus Pro did have some success against G2, like in their league. And I think that's because, like, honestly, Virtus Pro are like sit back and G2 are like run and gun in your face kind of style.
Yeah.
And they just happen to like win the gunfights on those days. But there are teams that like play a counteractive style to them.
So, of the teams coming in from phase 1 then, because you said that like Dark Zero are a team where that'd be difficult for Virtus Pro, or even Sonic might be difficult for Virtus Pro. Do we think there are any other teams coming in from phase 1 that might prove to be a difficult matchup that are a bit more methodical?
Maybe Eminem. Like, I think Eminem are maybe on the more methodical side. All the other teams I feel like are.
I think Eminem beat them in the open quals for G8 or GWB yesterday,
Yeah.
I want to say, as well, in a best of 3.
Now, obviously, like, I don't know how, like, obviously, I think every team puts different importance on that. Like, you never know how much importance is being placed on G8. Like, for us, we were playing it just because it was there. Like, in reality, it didn't really matter that much. That doesn't necessarily mean it's the same case for everyone.
You didn't want the Saudi oil money?
I don't know if you remember this last year, but I literally refused to play in it. So, don't really care about that one. But yeah, it like that's an interesting thing about Swiss is like it literally comes down to matchups. Like, what if Virtus Pro just somehow get like Sonics, DZ, Eminem? Like that could put them in like a that's possible. You never know. Like that could happen. But yeah, so I guess if we're only confidently removing 2 teams from the phase 2 teams to make it to the top 8, what 2 teams from phase 1 are sliding in those spots? Who are the 2 best phase 1 teams? Which again, just to rehash, Eminem, Wolves, SSG, Sonics, W7M, NIP, Revan, and Falcons.
That's a tricky one.
Yeah, I'm just looking at it and I'm like, dang, there's so many of them.
Because I think the other thing to consider too is some teams are better or worse against their own regions than other regions. Like, I'll use, I won't use that as an example, but like, there are teams that could get eliminated just because they have to play like same region every time. They don't get the matchup with like a different region too.
Are you talking about the team up in the stars, up by the moon? Little SSG is.
I think SSG
domestically,
are very,
kind of the
I think they're
opposite.
very good playing against NA teams.
I guess
But
I
I think that
misunderstood.
could go for like, yeah, it's not really worth discussing. But
Mhm.
who are we thinking is sliding in there in those two spots? If we're saying there's only two,
Maybe new W7M.
see,
And
I don't feel like W7M are on the stronger side nowadays.
Yeah.
I feel like they're close on the cusp if they fix the main things. I mean, let's compare entry stats from W7M during their SI run. They were like plus 43 as a roster. In like very few games of Brazil League this year, without Volps, they went like negative 12 aggregate.
Well, I mean, actually, I think
That's a
W7M.
huge swing.
I do think W7M are. I don't want to say they like fell off. So
Yeah.
they went 3-1 in their group in their region, and they lost. Their only loss was to Black Dragons, and then they lost first round to FaZe. Well, they were like automatically in the second
Mhm.
round, but they lost
Yeah.
their first matchup to FaZe, who obviously we know ended up winning, and then they beat Team One or Los One 7-3, 7-4 and qualified.
yeah, I mean, say what
Yeah.
you will. I mean, they had a better result against FaZe than Liquid did, and we think Liquid are one of the stronger teams in FaZe too.
Everyone always thinks Liquid are one of the strongest teams, to
Yeah.
be fair.
If W7M fixed their attacks, which were really slow for me, because on defense W7M it's still the same core except without Volps. Their roam game is incredibly strong. They can press, they can hit the full court press and make it so you can't really enter the building and it's really hard to break down. I still like their defenses, but their attacks had been so sluggish where they
Let's
hadn't
do this. Okay. So yeah, so continue that thought, but I have an idea for what we'll do here. Sorry.
Alrighty. Yeah, but their attacks were just so slow and like nobody stepped up. It was almost like they had the identity crisis of who's that guy on the attack that's going to really be the one instigating. And it led to a lot of really stalled attacks that would be an issue, especially I think even against NA and EU teams that can be a little bit more utility oriented. So if they kind of had that one guy step up, they could find success, but it also could be a really big weakness.
So one thing I did want to bring up, because it kind of just reminded me of it, is Liquid really struggled against the international teams at the less SI, and we didn't really bring them up as a team that could potentially not make it out of this phase 2. Obviously, they have Volps, who's like a great player.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any concern there that Liquid have the same issues where because at SI, Liquid went 1-3 in groups. They beat Direwolves, and then they went to playoffs, and they lost to BDS. So they played 5 matches, I think, and their only win was against Direwolves.
Yeah.
Is there any concern with Liquid struggling here, or are we saying with Volps like not as big of a deal?
Well, I definitely think that's a good point to bring up because I hadn't really considered it. Because I think when Lagonas got picked up on Liquid, at least from the conversations that I was just seeing, it seemed like a lot of the public opinion seemed like this might actually solve a lot of Liquid's issues. At least in that like where Liquid, it was like if not Nesk and Palu don't show up and maybe a third guy like doesn't compensate for that, the game is probably not going to win. Like they're still super reliant on their star players putting in really good star player performances, and when that doesn't happen, they struggle. And I think maybe we're hoping that Lagonas, having such good success on multiple LATAM teams as an IGL, would be able to fix that. And then they put in one of their worst international performances in a while, especially a far cry from their success at Yongshiping against BDS. And I think Volps is a very good player, and I think that's a very good pickup. And I think on paper, they probably are better with him than they are without him. But unless they've maybe taken some more time to acclimate to that system, maybe to get Lagonas on the roster and then slot Volps in, they could improve. But I actually think I might have been overrating them as well, because if Lagonas wasn't really seemingly like the long-term kind of secret sauce to make it work, I'm not sure that Volps is necessarily going to help everything as well, though it does lighten the load on, say, Nesk and Palu.
The thing is about that SI performance as well is, if I remember rightly, at SI they were in a group with, was it Eminem? It was with Sonics as well, right? It was
Eminem, Sonics, Direwolves,
Yeah.
and Wolves.
And Wolves, and they lost to Wolves as well. Yeah,
They lost to everyone except Direwolves.
Yeah, okay. Because I was gonna say, because Eminem and Sonic's both in in that group looked unreal during the group phases of
Right.
SI, and then Wolves. So to an extent, there is a little bit of an asterisk there that the opponents they were against were in a very hot run of form during the group stages. But
True.
I think that Vaults edition for me is why I'm not concerned about them, and I think you never, to an extent, if you cast SI aside, you're never worried about Liquid getting out of groups and going far. It's the back end of the tournament where you've got those kind of concerns about Liquid. Will they get over the line or will they just be third, fourth, second, whatever it is? So to be honest, I hadn't even thought about Liquid not making it out of phase 2.
So I think what I want to do here to figure out who we think is going to make it to phase 1, since it seems like everybody's kind of on the fence, is we'll go, or sorry, to phase 3. We'll go through the phase 1 teams we pick through, and if you want to make a case for why they're going to make it through, go for it. And if you convince everyone else, then at the end, we'll just say who we're picking, okay? I think that's fair. So for Eminem, now obviously I think a huge asterisk here is if Solotov can play or not.
Yes.
Yep.
If Solotov can't play, I think they still make it out of groups, but they're done. What's the case for Eminem here?
I think for Eminem is that front three that they've got is probably some of the most coveted players across Europe, to be fair. Adding in Nath, when they added him in for SI, it was very short, like in terms of the timeline. They've had a decent amount of time with Nath. They have looked, reasonably good, but also reasonably weak at times during EUL. But I think they're a team that, as the tournament goes on, gets better. I know SI kind of proved that to be the other way around. But they're a very balanced team and they've got a lot of good ideas.
Okay. Anybody else on the Eminem train here for like, some information that you'd like to share with us?
No like particular information that I'd like to share, but because I kind of operate sometimes in kind of making predictions like this, just kind of going off an eye test and like seeing how they look. And Eminem I think the fact that they've slowly crept into the conversation more and more with each event that's gone by. Like we had them at Charlotte, where we talked about Eminem and that they were there and that they might do well, but it wasn't like, that they had a super big shot at like winning the tournament or making a deep run, at least if I can recall correctly. And then we get to, kind of into Berlin and Jönköping, and they started to get more and more kind of focus placed on them, but still maybe falling a little bit behind the shadow of, say, a G2 or especially a BDS with the run they were making. But then with just how dominant they looked in the group stage at SI, even though they rapidly collapsed after that, those 4 best of 3s they played, they looked unequivocally like the best team in the group.
Yeah.
Like, it was lights out, and especially because it was like them and Sonics, and everyone was looking at that game as how it was going to pan out, and then they just completely mowed over Sonics, it felt like, in some rounds. I feel like now that they have time to actually incorporate Nath into the system, and they still have that, front 3, like players like Solotov, like Yuzus, for example, who can still perform really well and are now even more acclimated to the system and have more international experience. I feel like they've got to be a top contender coming out of phase 1, just because of the slow progress they've made over the year and how much more we've been noticing them. And then with how high their ceiling was in that group stage at SI, I feel like it's got to be a little bit more consistent here going into Copenhagen. You'd at least think in theory.
Okay. So then, if the Wolves are going to make it through, does anybody have a case for the Wolves to make it? Or are they being X'd out here?
I think the Wolves are going to be X'd out for the exact opposite reason why I think Eminem might make it through, is because Wolves, it felt like, were always in the conversation, and you could always put them as like maybe a reliable team to make it out of groups. And then they either would make it out of groups and not really go far in playoffs, or they wouldn't make it out of groups. And then they put in a very good run at SI, and got top 8, made it to the main stage, and even though they lost fairly soon after, that was a very good placing. But then they make a really big change, like Fresh was talking about, in taking out Rise, who would often set up a lot of the players on that team for success. And even if in the long term, switching out Rise for Deadshot is a move that will benefit them, I don't think we're in the long term yet. I think we're still in a stage where their performance can be very volatile. And with this being their first, international performance with slotting in Deadshot for Rise, I think it's going to need some more time in the oven to really make it a solid roster and a consistent one at that.
I think I agree. Unless they get, a lucky run of fixtures I say lucky, a fortunate, whatever, run of fixtures in the best of ones. I think if they hit best of threes against a lot of the teams already in phase one, I don't know if they've got the map pool to hold up to it as well, just to compound onto that. So, yeah, I would call Wolves out in phase two.
Okay. So then SSG. Is anybody making a case for SSG to make it through?
SSG is a hard one for me because we almost talked about how they had so many new players, and you would expect in like the short term where they were in a super crunched format for them to have struggled, but then they found the opposite, where coming out of groups, they were the number 1 seed. They looked really good in those BO1s, and that crunched really just kind of game format. And then when you kind of got to playoffs, where there was a little bit more prep time and went to BO3s, there was more kind of just overall thought process brought into games, that's where they struggled. Sure, they went up against M80, and that's kind of who ended up winning the whole thing. That's where we saw them initially take the step back. So I'm not necessarily worried about that because M80 were ridiculously underrated going into the playoffs, in my opinion, because they needed time to mesh with their 2 fraggers, Iconic and Spoit, coming in so late in the game. So I think overall, SSG with a little bit more time, you can also say like in GWB, they got absolutely smoked, whatever. They were already focused on going to Europe. They were already just like off in another world. I think they're going to reclaim a good amount of that form. I don't quite know enough, or I don't necessarily want to put enough stock in it that's saying like, yeah, they're a favorite to win the whole thing. But I think they're at least going to make it to phase 3.
Okay. Anybody else with SSG here?
The SSG team, or it's got a couple of the Astralis members on it, right? It's kind of, this is the same kind of vein people were thinking about Astralis at SI.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe, but I don't know.
Yeah, I feel like if SSG make it to phase 3, I definitely think it's possible, but I think it's gonna be like they're just gonna make it in. Like I
That's
don't
what
think
I was
they're
thinking.
Yeah, I don't think they're gonna win the first 3 best.
So they'd be like a 3. They'll go 2-2 and like win the 3-2 game.
Yeah, like I'm talking like last game of phase
Yeah.
2 is SSG's last chance at making it in, kind of late to the game, and I think some of that is. Part of that is just because, again, we don't know the exact matchups, and so if they go against a team, maybe like Dark Zero, or maybe even like a Liquid that's a bit more methodical, SG might feel a little bit better. But there are also teams that are like M80, but also like FaZe, who play a very chaotic play style that SSG in that M80 best of 3 seem to really struggle against. And similar to in that same vein, G2 as well, that they might struggle against. That if they just get so in SSG's face, they might struggle to deal with it. They certainly have the players who can like go toe to toe with, say, maybe a Doki, but do they have the system that can go toe to toe with it? I think it's a little bit too early to tell. So there are some teams I think they could do decently well against, like a Dark Zero or maybe a Liquid, and then obviously like a Scars or a D+. But there are also some teams in phase 2 that could come in from phase 1 as well, like an M&M or even like a Falcons, for example, that I think SSG I could see maybe dropping a map or a series, a very close series to.
Okay. I'll make a point for Sonics, and then anybody else can chime in. Going to Sonics. On paper, Sonics maybe have the best roster of any team, like just player for player. Really good players, obviously. Definitely up there, if not one of. And if I don't know if I'd say the best, but
definitely up there at least.
if you just look at their players, they're like top 8. At Yonkoping before Evan was replaced, they got 3-4 and they lost 2-1 to the team that won it. At SI, they looked very strong in groups outside of their match against and this was with Ben. Outside of the match against Eminem, and then they had to play 2 NA teams in playoffs. They didn't play any international teams. They lost a match, last round, to Dark Zero to move on to round 2, which they probably should have won. We also saw what happened against Astralis, where they just had like ridiculous chokes. Probably should have won that match too. And then going into NAL stage 1 this year, we've tried to switch to a different play style, which was more of how the Sonics used to play, which it worked like okay. They got third in the league, and then they lost 2-1 maps to M80, who ended up winning the league. You could argue if you watch that match, Sonic should have won 2-0. They lost the first map 6-8, and I think they trolled like 4 rounds or something because that's what Sonics do. And then between the end of that and the LCQ, the team went back to Geo's style of play, which is how we played at SI and Yonko Ping, and they won, obviously, the LCQ. And my main point about that is, if you remember, and this kind of goes back to what I was like talking about with SI, TSM, which is like, I would say, Geo style of play, always were not the best in region. But whenever they would go internationally, international teams really had a problem with TSM.
Reliable top 4 at SI. I mean, even before they won it.
Yeah.
But within their own region, TSM struggled a bit. So we're now back on what I would say is that sort of system where, in my opinion, it will be matchup based. I think we will do better against other region teams than our own region, as seen like at SI, like just like even in our own region now. I think the team is built to perform better internationally than in region. It just is going to come down to matchups, because the Sonics could play DZ, SSG, and then, you know, obviously they did beat DZ in the league, but, you know, those are more coin tosses to me, where honestly I'd have more like faith if we're playing Liquid than if we're playing like DZ, just because I feel like we're better with the unknown aspect of that than playing the teams you know.
I also think a point to Sonics' credit as well is that, you know, normally when you see a team doing a kind of a dramatic play style shift, not necessarily one that they're not experienced with, because obviously Geo and the team as a whole has experience with this new play style, air quotes. But when you hear things like that, you get a little bit worried that they might not perform well at the next tournament just because it's a big change on very short notice. But the point to Sonic's credit is that not only the players, especially with Geo, are so experienced that they can slot in a little bit quicker than I think than other teams into a new play style, but the support staff is also so robust, and the system at Sonic seems to just be very, very intense, but in like a good way, and that like they're not half-assing it, like bringing Jobro back in after SI to really try and grind things out and iron out all the problems. I think of all the teams that could right now maybe make a playstyle shift before a major, Sonics are the team where it's the least likely to probably affect them, because
I will say you can see in LCQ2 is Geo's particular playstyle has been much more beneficial for Citizen than like the NAL style, because I think everybody knows Ben is a great player, but I think he would even say he didn't play amazing in NAL. But if you watched him in the LCQ or even in the Gamers 8, where they weren't even like necessarily like going crazy, Ben was like, he was like plus 40 or something in the LCQ, like literally dropping 15 kills a game. So, you know, if Ben is unleashed with the other players, I feel like there's a possibility that Sonics make a deep run. But again, there's also a possibility they shit their pants because they troll 4v1s. It's like nobody's business.
And I think that's the point I'm making, right? Is that Sonics have players that are not only very good in the lobby, but also seem to have a very good head on their shoulders to, you know, take feedback and try and really action on feedback they get and make changes in the play style individually and as a team, and they have the support staff to kind of prop up that system as well. So I think I even though it's your show and I want to just be like fuck you, I do think that it is fair for the factors I mentioned that you've mentioned as well, that Sonics could make a run to phase 3. Though I think it might also be close, like SSG.
Do I start shilling now? Is that what happens?
You could.
Sure.
Be King Bounce.
I think about Sonics in the same vein that I've thought about G2 past probably 12 months. Is that there's one hell of a team there. When they unlock that right formula that works for the team composition and themselves, they will kind of be unleashed. Now, if you're still in that period of flip-flopping of, you know, one person's play style or another person's play style, or once you've figured that out, and let's say once the Sonics figure that out, I genuinely have a lot of faith in this team. I think you've got a lot of very good and very strong players there, alongside, Gio obviously being a world champion and, probably the most experienced player, or one of the most experienced players still playing the game. So I've got a lot of faith.
And
I think,
Chunner. You forgot Chunner.
yeah,
Chad Gunner.
Chad Gunner.
Have you heard him sing High School Musical?
I thought it was Gunnar.
Gunnar.
Don't get me
Gunnar.
started on Gunnar.
But yeah, no, I mean, obviously Gunnar gets a lot of unfair, probably, criticism.
Yes.
I think there's a very good team there that once they start, I think, if they started playing the similar way that G2 do, the way that kind of G2 went about it of, doing a lot of split theory and opportunity spotting, I think there's a lot of good players that are capable of doing that, they could go far. But I agree with the assessment. Is like, if Sonics went up against DZ or, more teams that are acclimatized to them regionally, then they might struggle like they did at SI. So, but yeah, they would be probably, if I had to pick two teams that, we were talking about the 8 that came through, if I had to pick two, they would probably be one of my two that go through.
Okay. Going to W7M, we talked briefly about them. Who's shilling for W7M here?
I mean, I know Connor, you obviously did Brazil. Do you want to do any W7M shilling, or do you want me to
I don't necessarily.
bounce for a
I
bit?
think that they're gonna hitting phase 2 and having like a solid phase 2 is about where they need to be, considering like they're still trying to kind of reinvent themselves just a bit. I don't think they're quite there yet. They're getting there, but not quite.
Yeah, I think with W7M, and I just think this phase 2 in particular is very stacked.
Mm-hmm.
Like M80, Dark Zero, Virtus Pro, G2, FaZe, Liquid, like the teams from the main 3 regions that are in phase 2, I feel like from playoffs, for example, were very much like the top 2 regions in the team, or at least maybe top 3 as well, but were neck and neck with a lot of the other teams that both qualified and they played with in like the later rounds of the playoffs. And I think W7M could be in a similar boat. Again, there's not like too much going off of it, but they put up a very solid performance against FaZe, who were able to, deal with Liquid decently well, and put up a very good performance regionally against a lot of teams like FaZe and Los One that have played at international events before. And, in the case of Los One, they obviously didn't do like exceptional at SI, but like they did decent enough for a LATAM team that had kind of just made it in behind the likes of the old W7M or FaZe or Liquid in that case. And I think if they do make it to phase 3, it'll be similar to SSG. Like, it could be, in this scenario I'm thinking of, it could be an SSG W7M last match of phase 2. Who makes it in, who doesn't, kind of thing. So I think if they make it in, it's not going to be easy, because, again, they will have to deal with kind of the Titans of Brazil, or teams like G2 or M80, who are just so damn good right now. It'll be difficult to deal with. But I think it's possible. It really just depends on the matchups, and if they do make it, I think it'll probably be a lengthy run in phase 2. It won't be a quick entry or exit.
Yeah, I will say on their behalf, as I kind of mentioned earlier, they did have a pretty good result in their own region. They finished first in their group, and then they lost one match in the playoffs, which was a 1-2 loss to FaZe, who won their league, and then they 2-0'd Los One pretty easily. Now, Los One didn't make the major, so I guess you could rate that how you want. But I think W7 number is still very good. They still have 3/5 of that like Unreal team, and I do think they're maybe even slightly being underrated because of that. But
they still have keys, man. They still have keys. That dude's the GOAT.
I mean, if I was gonna pick, like W7M would probably be a team that I think would make it through. I also think they like now. With some of these newer rosters, I do always have concerns about the best of 3s. Because I don't know what their map pools are like going in a best of 3s. Because in a best of 1, you can definitely hide that you're not good at like 3 or 4 maps. Whereas like with a lot of these teams that have new players and whatnot, there is concern that maybe they're weaker on some maps, which could hurt them. But I definitely think W7M are like a strong contender to make it out of stage 2, and I think they could really fuck up some of the teams that are already in phase 2, depending on who they play. Because like W7M, they're W7M. Like they can beat any of these teams. They have a play style that's pretty unique to play. And in the past, they have traditionally, I know they lost to G2, but traditionally they've really only struggled against like Liquid, I think it is. Like they pretty much handle everyone else. So I feel like they're a big threat. Now, obviously, I know they have a different team, but I do think they're kind of being overlooked a little bit because of their changes, but I still think they are a strong threat to make it out of phase 2.
Yeah, and I think, and to your point, they did make some changes, but like they've got 3/5 of that core, as you said, and they seemed like they were going to win SI. I mean, it seemed like they were.
Well, they were the favorite. The other thing about them is I would say they were literally the favorite to win every tournament last year. They just never won. But maybe not the first tournament, maybe not Charlotte. But after Charlotte, I think they were probably the favorite to win every major and SI. And they just never won. But, like, this is the first time in, like, a year they're not going into this where everyone's saying, yeah, W7M's, like, gonna win. Right? They're kind of being overlooked, which I think is, like, scary for other teams because that's not a team I feel like you overlook. Because you got to remember, Julio, even though he's not on the team, he was only on the team for one stage last year. And they replaced the other, like, Julio's loss, I don't know, is, like, that significant to the team. Now, Volps is a different story. But they did bring in, like, some pretty solid, like, I think they're being overlooked. I think they're a strong contender to make it to the playoffs for sure. Does anybody here want to shill for NIP, or is this a X off?
Bummer.
No, so NIP is out. I will say, I'll briefly mention this just in case it happens to be right. There's always, it happens at SI because it hasn't been happening at the majors until now. But there is usually like 1 or 2 teams that make it through the qualifiers, and that's like, that bumps them up, and then they just go like super deep at that tournament, like the next tournament. So
They get powered up.
like, so the teams that won the qualifiers would be like Sonics, NIP, Wolves. Like, those are teams I think you keep an eye on because there has traditionally been like a power up from winning those quals heading into a big tournament. I think we also said that Revan would make it through. Is anybody here chilling for Revan? Lynnx, you look like you got something to say.
If on my flight back I tune in and I see you're on the main stage, it's gone awry, fellas. It's gone awry.
All right, and then Falcons. Does anybody want to make any kind of case for the Falcons?
Not a logical one.
Yeah, I was about to say any case I'd make would be purely emotional. Like, I think they can make a deep run in phase 2, but I don't think they make it through.
Okay,
that's
so
that's like their ceiling.
Okay, so has anybody been persuaded? Do we have a set 2 who's making it through? CDaps, who's your 2?
I've been swayed off the SSG train because of everybody's Sonic's hopium. So, I'm going to breathe that in.
Yes.
And I do like your point with W7M that, like, now that I'm thinking about it, like, they only lost a phase, really. Like, I think I was underrated them, and I was in the region. I'm going to go Sonic's W7M.
Lynnx, let's hear it. Spit it out.
If Solotov is playing, I think Eminem W7M. If Solotov isn't playing, I think Eminem Sonics.
Okay.
Oh, sorry, W7M Sonics. Excuse me.
Okay, I was about to say that's a bold call. You think Solotov?
Julio on primary.
Hey,
entry,
listen,
baby.
how many finals has Julio been in? He's not gonna miss this one. That's all I'm gonna say.
Oh, honestly though, if Julio's playing, it changes that team so much because then you're looking at 3 backline players and literally the best entry on that team gone. So, I'm so split. I'm gonna go Sonics and Eminem, and I'm gonna leave W7M in phase 2.
Okay, so then that means we have 2 Sonics.
We have 2 of each.
Yeah, with like the asterisk, if Solotov doesn't play, then Sonics make it over Eminem. All right, I mean that's fine. We'll just have 9 teams in the end.
Yeah, that's all good.
You can just have predictions. Okay. So then for the playoffs, obviously we're not going to know the bracket. So I'm just going to ask, out of the teams that we've picked through, who's making the finals, who's winning, who's top 4? So basically, who do you think are the 4 best teams here? Who's the best team? who's making the finals. Obviously, that doesn't always play out that way because certain matchups could mess up certain teams, certain map pools mess up certain teams. You could have an inter-regional matchup where one of the teams just beats a team that's better than them. But if you just had to guess, say, who's the best team, who's making the finals, who's top 4, what are you saying? If you want to refresh on the teams, it's VP, G2, M80, DZ, FaZe, Liquid, M&M, Sonics, W7M. Those are the 9 to choose from. Who's top 4? Let's start with that. Who's top 4?
Oh, fuck me.
Do you want me to go? I'll go.
Please.
Top 4, G2, M80, Liquid, and Sonics.
The Sonics
Ooh.
making the run. I like this.
That's
Sonic,
that's not
Sonic's
just because I'm
top
on your
4.
podcast, by the way.
It's the LCQ buff.
The thing is I've had a lot of belief in this Sonics roster, and I think if it goes right, then if a few things fall in line, they can go far, and I think they're one of the best teams in the world. It's just not gone right at the last couple of events. Well, I suppose Jönköping was top 4, right? So
Yeah.
it's not a million miles away. It's conceivable they'll be top 4.
And then we banished Kansan to Mirage.
A fate
man.
worse than death.
He's in the dunes.
he's on Arrakis.
I was thinking about this, and it's kind of foul, but like when we won NAL like a year ago or whatever it was, a year and a half ago now, if you would have told Evan that he would be on Mirage getting coached by Yardi a year and a half later, like what would he have like bet that wasn't gonna happen? It would be like that's just insane.
It'd be like the end of The Godfather. Like you just say that, and he's like the wife watching you close the door on him. He's like, "What?"
All right, CDaps, top 4.
Alrighty. I'm gonna go with I agree with the G2 M80. I'm gonna swap Liquid and say FaZe hits it, and I think it comes down to DZ versus Sonics for me. And I think that's just, even like you said, just a straight coin flip. And I'll just agree and say that the LCQ buff makes it like a 52-48.
This is a bias. This is
like such shills now.
Yeah, this is a bias. This is
Oh,
bias.
don't worry.
Okay, Lynnx. Well, Sonic's already outnumber you, so go ahead, make your prediction. It looks like we're top 4, buddy.
I love democracy. I agree with G2 M80. G2 is just, they're kind of gonna have that, like, I mean, obviously they look really good anyway, but like they have the world champ buff right now, so like I feel like I have to predict them top 4, especially because they don't look like they've really diminished in form all that much. So I feel like they're pretty easy to make top 4. I also just think M80's playstyle right now is just, it's very interesting because XSET last year were a team was like, if they have the momentum, they do really well. And it's like they never really ironed that out of their system. They just brought on players who are better at keeping the momentum super high. So like they just never really stop like being on the hype train, and they just keep snowballing. So I think if like at this point, if they're in a game and they start out well, like they can easily win it. So I think M80 are another pretty comfortable pick for top 4 for me. The other two is where things get a little difficult. I'm probably gonna say Liquid as well. And so we're going to have 3 of the same. And I feel like G2 M80 and then Liquid / FaZe are fairly comfortable top 4 predictions. But you know what? I think Virtus Pro might make top 4. I think it's possible because there is a very strong power in teams not being able to shake the feeling that they can beat you and that you're very beatable. Because even though we've had the conversation about how if you just kind of play VP's, if you kind of play the VP's game and you don't just try to steamroll over them, that you can win.
They do have a land buff usually too.
Yeah, there's the land buff as well. But they have a game. They know what they want to do. They've known what they want to do for 4 years now, and they play that game as well as they could with great players to do it. And quite a few teams who I don't think any of us would say are bad, like teams like G2 or other teams in the EUL, are just like, oh yeah, we can just walk over them and beat them. But there are a lot of teams who, when it comes to facing them in the server, haven't had that exact realization yet, like in LATAM or in NA, that haven't really had to play VP yet in 2023. And I think that's maybe, obviously different play styles, but similar to how it was with CAG and like Mexico. Like, I think this might be a wake up call event for a lot of the other non-EU regions that if Virtus Pro get a lot of, say, LATAM or NA matchups, that they might do really well, even against some of the more methodical teams, just because that team seems to be on a hot streak right now. So I think VP are a bit of a dark horse for top 4 for me personally. So my top 4 would be M80, G2, Liquid, and Virtus Pro.
Okay, so then I think that leaves Democracy saying top 4 is G2, Liquid, M80, Sonics, with 1 vote for Virtus Pro over Sonics, right?
And
Yeah,
one
I
vote
said
for I think
FaZe
FaZe
over-
over Liquid.
Yeah.
but-
Oh, okay, so yeah. So FaZe has a vote, Virtus Pro has a vote, but the majority is G2, Liquid, M80, Sonics. Okay? So who's making the finals and who's winning fresh?
V2 and M8 to make the finals.
Yeah.
And then this one is actually just because I'm very good friends with the G2 support staff in Titan and Fabian. I'm gonna say G2 win it just to curse them, just so they don't. So
Not the back-to-back.
Yeah,
That'd be the first time in a long time there's a back-to-back.
G2 are gonna get the back-to-back, I believe.
All right, CDaps.
I'm going off beat. I think it's gonna be Brazil final with M80 versus FaZe.
And who's winning?
I think FaZe
Come
squeaks
on.
it out.
You motherfucker. You
Okay.
son of a bitch.
Lynnx, let's hear it.
I also think it's going to be an M80 G2 final, but that's just because I think that'd be the best final at this event. I think that would be the most like obviously I think they're two of the best teams of the event. Obviously in our hypothetical world they've made top 4.
Yeah.
And I think out of the top 4 those are the best teams, but I also think just like to put myself in like a viewer's shoes for a second and someone who just likes the game. I mean, that's got to be a super fun final to watch. I mean, Alamau is friends with good friends with Kino, has good relations, at least like publicly, with all the people in that team. There's very good banter. You've got a lot of notable people like Doki, like Iconic. And I think just with those two teams' play styles, both of those teams show the kind of meta we're in perfectly right now, that it's all about getting in people's faces, taking risky engagements, taking gunfights, and especially with M80, playing sort of cheesier operators like Ying or Monty. And I think it'd be a good showcase not only of like where the game is right now, and that it really is one of the more exciting times, like gameplay-wise, to be watching Rainbow Six, but also that I just think these two teams, their ceilings are ridiculously high, and if they're both playing even close to them, it'll be the most entertaining final possible out of the teams of this event.
And who are you picking to win?
So Fresh picked G2 to curse G2.
In my
So-
opinion, if G2 make the final, they would win, just because they literally have had the most pressure possible on them and won already. If it's a new experience, like let's say M80 makes the final, only Spoit would have been in that situation. Well, no, Iconic, I guess, too, because he made the Charlotte Major final. But G2 have literally been at the pinnacle, the highest level, the most pressure possible, and they already won. So I feel like there's a better chance that they close it out than M80, just based off the fact that they're more familiar with that situation. Because obviously there is a lot of pressure in that moment.
Nah, Kino ain't losing to Alamo. M80 win.
Okay. So then we have one FaZe winner, one G2 winner, and one M80 winner.
Where do you stand?
Oh, Sonics won.
Yeah?
I mean, probably undefeated. No rounds lost. 21-0. Okay, so we've kind of gone through the teams, groups, whatever. I guess the only other thing I wanted to mention here is just because there is a lot of teams, there's a lot of new teams, a lot of new players. If a casual fan is watching this, do you have any players that maybe is not, they're not as known as like a Spoid or a Citizen or any of those kind of guys that a fan should be looking out for? Because this is actually funny, but so before the Mexico Major, I actually said on my stream that there's this guy named Alamau on Team 1, because people didn't know who he was at that point, and that he was like, in the SQ rating system, he was like the highest rated player going into the event. And so I was like, look out for this guy Alamau on Team 1. I think he's he's a really good player. I think you guys, just keep an eye out for him. and then they won the event, and now obviously he's a world champion. But like nobody really knew who he was before that whole event happened.
I mean, there are some, I think, kind of obvious ones that like I would say to kind of the average Siege fan who maybe just watches one region like NA or Europe and doesn't know, like Falcons, like, you know, Joker 619 for example, or like a few people on that Falcons team. You should keep your eye on just because they could put up some really good individual performances, or say, I know you're gonna hate this, Supr or Jack, but an Aki Beal maybe from Six Karma as well. Individually, this might be an interesting player to watch. But from North America, which is obviously like the region I casted, and Seth, the region you know also watch very frequently. I would say not to, you know, because I do a lot of defending of him a lot on Reddit and Twitter and on broadcast. I think Gunner should be watched this event because I think
People
Gunner...
will be watching Gunner.
Well,
Let me tell you that.
No. But in a good way, because like I'm gonna be honest. Okay. I'm gonna get my soapbox for a second. I am tired of the Gunner slander. I am over it. Okay, I get like there are some games where he doesn't put up good performances. One, he's on like what was he on like secondary support during the like on that system? Seth, would you say that like he's playing like Lion? He's playing like other things like that.
He has been playing like an LCQ. If you watched, he played, I would say, mainly Smoke on defense, and then on attack, he was playing like Sledge and things like that, like Lion Sledge, things like that.
So he's put a little bit more, maybe comparatively at the forefront during LCQ. But the reason I think you should watch Gunner is there are multiple times during the NAL, and I said this exact thing on broadcast, I think during the SQ OXG game, which admittedly was a really boring game, aside from the Yaga reaction moment, is that Gunner, there are like strings of 3 or 4 rounds where he is basically the difference maker. Like, I've not seen someone so consistently, I feel like, except for like a star player like Panamazoo, just have 4 or 5 rounds where they are winning every single opening duel and just having a hot streak in game and being able to do that over multiple games in the NAL. And I think that's really impressive, not just for someone who is still relatively new to the NA ecosystem. He's obviously not a rookie anymore, but this is his, I think, 3rd stage of Pro League, because he came in during stage 2 of last year. Yeah. And he's still able, on a role that is behind players like Rexen, like Grixer, who are one of the best, you know, entries or best aggressive players in the world, or best fraggers in the world. And he's still able to have moments in the game where he is that guy for like a quarter to half the game. I think is really impressive for someone who is playing, say, Smoke on defense or Lion on attack.
Lynnx fucking loves Sonics, dude. It's insane. I didn't know I was bringing in the fucking Sonics fan committee here.
No. I'm just a Gunner fan. Like, you know, it's partially biased. Like, you know, I've casted him for like 3-4 years now. But I think, one, I've seen him get a lot of hate that I think is unjustified, and I also think he has a lot to bring to the table that maybe some more casual viewers aren't picking up on.
Yeah.
Okay, CDaps, who you got?
Watching Gunner grow up has been very, very satisfying. But I mean, I kind of already alluded to it earlier. For Fury, I think Crit J is a good person to watch. Like, literally, like, nobody knows who he is, and I think he's actually kind of nasty. From other rosters, I mean, W7M, Nade, the only other international competition he's gotten to play was at Jonkoping, and they kind of got smoked. So now he's on a much better team. He's not on Black Dragons, who struggled, and he's a lot different of a player. So if W7M are going to have the success that we seem to have, I think he's going to be a massive part of it, and that's a nice new name for that roster, kind of filling in the shoes of Volps.
Fresh, who you got?
If I was a viewer from a European region, look out for users. The reason that I say that is that M&M at times are going to look like the best team in the world, and then at other times they're going to look like the worst team in the world, and then somewhere out of nowhere they'll have a really shit round, and it will be completely recovered by users. His kind of late round clutch ability and his game sense, just sense of where the opponents are. You know, the amount of times I've seen him covering Nello to plant, where he just like on Overwatch, just spinning 360, just killing everybody basically. Makes him very fun to play, very, very fun to watch in these kind of pockets of moments. And then I'm gonna say one more as well. From the European region, Joe from Revan. Now, Revan's game style is very aggressive. Joe is at the forefront of that. He will be the entry kill or the entry death of probably 95% of the rounds that Revan play at the major. So if you're looking for a bit of fun, then watch out for Revan and watch out for Joe.
Yeah, I actually I think the Uzis pick is good. I think Soltov would also be a good pick on that team. Maybe just because Eminem is a small club that maybe people aren't as familiar with some of them, but I think those two guys are like actually really good players. This guy, I think if you know Siege, you think he's like a world-class player, but he's super quiet and he doesn't like the way he plays isn't flashy, but I think Diaz on M80 is a player to watch if you're like a casual fan. Like obviously they have star players, they have like big name players on that team like Iconic and Spoit. You could argue Diaz might be their best player. I think it's probably between him and Spoit. But Diaz is like a world-class player, and he's just kind of like, he's just quiet, so he doesn't play, he's not very flashy. So I don't think he maybe gets as much acclamation as he should. For DZ, Gavini, he had like an okay SI, went absolutely crazy during NAL. I think he was like second or third highest rated player.
Yep.
This is his first major that he's actually qualified for because he played SI without ever playing Pro League. I think if DZ make a deep run here, it's going to be on the back of like Gavini, NJ, and Pamba. And I think if Gavini doesn't play as strong as he did in the league, that maybe DZ don't do as well as people think. I think Gavini is a really good player. I think he will do good. Obviously, I think the whole Virtus Pro roster, you know, we just missed these guys all of last year. Legendary 4 of them. I know Pasha's like new to the team, obviously. But these are some of the best players to ever play the game. This is one of the probably the greatest core to ever play the game. They've been together forever. They've had success against every kind of meta, and they never waver. Like, I think they're interesting to watch because while everyone else is like changing and adapting, they just like stay the course, and somehow it just keeps working out for them. In particular, I think Dan is one of the best players in the game. Shepard is arguably the best support player who's played the game. Like, these are legendary players on Virtus Pro. On FaZe, I mean, this is a whole new FaZe roster for a lot of people. Vita King had a rough SI. Handy and KDS are new to this team. I think FaZe for fans are just worth watching because, you know,
Cyber is also going crazy.
Yeah, I mean, Cyber's like obviously one of the best players in the world. For Damwon or D+, we haven't seen these guys in a while. They have Woogie Man, who I don't know if you guys remember. Like, after SI, people were saying Woogie Man's like one of the best players in the world. He kind of just fell out of the spotlight because their team wasn't playing well. I think he's somebody to keep an eye on. Going down the board, on NIP, if they make a run, keep an eye on their new player Cons. You know, if he's playing well, I feel like that's going to potentially push NIP into phase 3, which would be like a huge shock. So that would probably mean that he's like really doing something special. On Revan, I'm actually a fan of Draw. I think pay attention to Draw. I think he's actually a pretty good player. From what I've heard, he even like in the past maybe even had a chance to get on like an EU pro team, and he just was like kind of a jackass and didn't make the team or something like that. But I think he's actually a good player, and to keep an eye on him. I hate to say this, but if 6K do end up like upsetting NIP, I do think keep an eye on Akabil. For those of you that don't know, at one point Akabil almost got picked up by Parabellum into NA Pro League. So I think he's kind of thought of as the best Mexican pro player who's like not like Geo, obviously, who's like not in Pro League right now. So I think Akabil's worth keeping an eye on. And then, yeah, if you don't know Falcons, Joker 619 and O-Kills. O-Kills won the most kills in the tournament at Gamers 8. And Joker 619 was like a standout player at that tournament.
O-Kills
keep an eye out.
He has
for
a
them.
Reddit flair. That's all you need to know.
O-Kills is also an ironic name. Like,
yeah, I don't really have a reason for like keeping an eye on this guy, but I just think his name is funny. Healthcare OG on Elevate. Like, I don't know, he might be horrible for all I know, but I mean, his name is Healthcare OG. Like, you got to keep an eye on him.
Also, sorry to interject real quick, but repping the NA boys, J90 SSG. Keep an eye on him. I think he's the best player on the roster, personally.
No, I agree, J9. I just didn't mention him because I feel like people know him by now. Like,
that's true, I guess.
Yeah.
But you could maybe put him in like maybe he's the more quiet kind of player, so it's
that
like
was my
Diaz, like a Diaz grouping. And yeah, like Sonics have this guy named Rexen, You should keep an eye on him. He's never on any CGG top 40 list ever in the history of the game. So maybe keep an eye on that guy. He's kind of good sometimes as well.
What does he play? What are his roles?
He's like Thermite, and then he'll play like Mute
Oh, sick.
or Clash.
Mute in this day and age is pretty tough. I mean, you gotta like do 8,000
Yeah,
site
you're-
setup.
you're
and
moving it
3
slow
armor.
He's
motion
mainly
while doing-
he's good at playing Sight.
Oh, that's good.
He's not very aggressive though.
He could be Geo on the entry one day.
Maybe. All right. Well, I think that'll do it. This was a pretty long one, 2 hours and 20 minutes. I'm sure it's 2 hours of us getting every single thing wrong, so it might be funny to like watch it
You mean
back
correct.
in 2 weeks when the final is like North Eption against Fury, and then CDaps will be like on Twitter being like, "I told you, Fury,
Crit J!
Crit J, MVP." So looking forward to that. Thank you to Lynnx. Thank you for CDaps. Thank you to Fresh for joining me. If you are watching, let me know what you think about this kind of prediction instead of one with like just another pro player, because I think this is like for
Specifically
informed.
Yardy.
Yeah, well, the only pro player in existence, Drip Boolin. But yeah, appreciate it. Thank you guys for joining me. Hope you guys enjoyed, and I will see you for co-streams. I guess I don't know if any of you guys are co-streaming as well.
Yes,
I
will be.
Okay.
I'm working phases 1 and 2, and then I'm graduating like during
Okay.
phase 3. So
Okay.
no.
Humble brag. Like nobody asked if you're fucking graduating, dude. We get it.
Yeah.
College education. Like cool
I'm a hustler.
guy.
I'm a hustler, baby.
All right. So check out Fresh. Fresh. What's your Twitch?
Fresh on desk.
Fresh on desk. He'll be co-streaming the major. Obviously, I will be
Just
too. Phase 1. CDaps, will you?
I haven't decided yet. I've got
Alright.
some stuff
You
coming
should
up.
follow
so.
me on Twitter, twitter.com/castinglinks.
Nobody wants to.
CDaps R6.
All right, Fresh, go ahead. Is it Fresh on desk again?
Fresh on desk, yeah.
All right. Well, I'm Supr, but you knew that. I'll be co-streaming starting on the 24th. See you guys then. Thanks for hanging out.